Okay, so let me just say a few things, and those end up being repeated. First of all, because we're going to have hopefully upwards of 200 people in the meeting, if you don't want to see a lot of empty black boxes with names on it, you can go to the top of your screen or go into any one of those black boxes. You'll see little dots there. Click on them, and you'll have the option to eliminate those black boxes. So you're not seeing the people with the who are not whose faces are not on the screen. Obviously, the only people you're going to see tonight are going to be myself, and I'm going to have Jennifer Lyons helping me tonight to monitor, to keep track of time and pass me the questions and tell me all the things that I'm forgetting to do. Ted Crane is working furiously, I'm sure, on 2 computers in the background, knowing Ted, getting all this lined up, getting everybody in the meeting and getting things lined up. Katie Nicholson and Liz Hartman are going to be helping, have been helping and organizing the questions and into different categories. So we'll be able to ask them hopefully in a very useful and in-depth way. So are we still, excuse me, are we still letting people in, Ted? Well, let me start with a few words of welcome beyond what I've already said, which is, if you don't know, I'm the chairman of the Tompkins County Democratic Committee. And, you know, a couple months ago, seems like a year ago, when we planned to have a candidate forum on April 14th, little did we know that it wouldn't be live and in person, and one of our meeting spots in Ithaca. But the world has changed, and here we are. And the TCDC is diligently working to adjust to the circumstances we find ourselves in. And that's what we're doing here tonight. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate your being here, as do the candidates, I'm sure. If you, as I started to say, if you don't want to see lots of black empty boxes, you can put your cursor usually at the top of the screen or over any particular picture, and where there's, or any black box where there's nobody appearing, and click in there, and you can hide those pictures. If you have a question, a tech question, something that's happening and you don't know why you're not able to see or hear or whatever, send a chat message to Ted Crane. You'll see under the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, that's where you can also ask questions. Direct those questions to Katie Nicholson and to Liz Hartman. If you send the questions to me, I'm not going to see them because I'm not even having that window open, because goodness knows I wouldn't be able to pay attention. But send them to Katie and to Liz, and they'll help pass them on to me. Let's see. It is being live streamed on YouTube, and it will be recorded there. You can find the links for that on our webpage and all of our social media sites, right, Jennifer? You've got yourself muted. All right, that's a yes. And and we will be making sure that information is available so people who can't watch tonight can go back and watch. While you go to our social media or website, while you're there, we're always happy if you decide to click on the donate button and send us a little donation, or a big one for that matter, to help us continue to fund all these things. When you do a Zoom meeting of this size, guess what? It's not for free like when you do 3 people for 40 minutes. So everything costs money. Money is the mother milk of politics, whether we like it or not. So we're always appreciate when you can chip in and help us keep the TCDC strong and able to participate as fully as we're all going to be able to in the virtual world we're currently living in. And hopefully by this summer and fall, we'll be able to actually meet in person safely and have a campaign headquarters and do all those sorts of things. But however we're going to need to do it, we're going to be prepared to be fully involved in the campaign. I have a statement here from the Board of Elections, and I'm going to read that. It's from Steve DeWitt, the Democratic Election Commissioner in Tompkins County. And I'll read it again later in the meeting, and this statement will be available also on our webpage and our social media sites. But it answers some of the questions that many of you have about how to go about participating in the June 23rd primary. So, the BOE urges all voters to apply for an absentee ballot as early as possible for the June 23rd primary election. This will reduce the possible exposure to our poll workers and allow us to incorporate sound social distancing measures for those voters that choose to vote in person. Remember, in order to receive an absentee ballot, one needs to file an application with the BOE, go to the votetompkins.com to access the application form and instructions. One major and significant difference is that by executive order, Governor Cuomo has decreed that the potential of contracting COVID-19 virus qualifies as a temporary illness or disability, and one can check that box on an absentee ballot application as an excuse for needing to vote by absentee ballot. Let's all keep our poll workers safe and request our absentee ballots immediately. Go to votetompkins.com, fill out your applications, and check temporary illness. The BOE prefers that you submit your application via email, mail, or fax, as the office is currently not open to the public. If you have any questions, please contact Steve DeWitt at sdewitt@tompkinscounty.org. And once again, you don't have to write all that down. It'll be on our website and our social media sites. So with that having been said, let me go to our first guest tonight, or our first participant, a candidate for state senate in, I'm terrible to remember this. It's the 58th, Leslie, is that what it is? Yes, all right. The 58th Senate District, Leslie Danks-Burke. Welcome, Leslie. Got to make Leslie able to talk there, Ted. Leslie can talk. We got to make her so we can hear her.
She is.
There we go.
It's her own private mute.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't working, but now we're good. Okay. Thank you very much, Jim, and huge congratulations to the Tompkins County Democratic Committee for pulling this together. I see 12 video participants, and I have a note at the top of my screen that there's 87 non-video participants. That is extraordinary. It's really a testament to making sure that democracy continues even in a pandemic, which is extraordinary. I just really applaud you, Jim, and the rest of the Tompkins County Democratic Committee. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak briefly. I realize that I am not in a primary race, and so there are a lot of folks who are coming after me who really deserve the stage to be able to have a pretty important conversation with all of you. And I appreciate you letting me speak for a few minutes here at the beginning. I am running for New York State Senate. I'm running against incumbent Senator Tom O'Mara, who has been in the position for about a decade and simply isn't getting the job done. This campaign that I'm running is about all of us in a 5-county region. It's Steuben, Schuyler, Tompkins, Yates, and Chemung counties. It's a huge geographic district, and I am absolutely committed to getting a voice for this district to the table. We live in a stunningly beautiful place. There is no doubt about that, and we have extraordinary opportunity here. We have very hardworking people. We have tremendous resources, and we are getting severely shortchanged. There is also no doubt about that. If you look at our taxes are through the roof. I think anyone who's a taxpayer in this region can agree that we're paying higher taxes than just about anywhere else in the country, and yet we still have 1 in 4 school children who shows up at school hungry. And yet we still have seniors who cannot access healthcare. We have jobs that are unavailable for our young people. Our young people are leaving because they can't find a bright future here, and we need to do better. If we're paying the money into the system, we need to develop a system that doesn't mean that our dollars are going to cover the folks at the tippity top who pay no taxes at all, but instead that our dollars are going into pay for our young children, our seniors, our education, our bridges and roads, and all of the places that are getting shortchanged in our community. I am standing up to fight for this region because I believe we deserve it. I ran for this seat in 2016, came up short. 2016 was not a good year for Democrats. I think all of us know that. In 2016, running this race in a 32% Democratic district, only 32% of the voters in this district are registered Democrat. My campaign team was able to earn 45% of the vote. And we were extraordinarily proud of that outcome. But unfortunately, in 2016, 45% only got you the presidency. It did not get you a state Senate seat. And so I did not win that race. That said, I didn't stop working a minute. I kept my office open. I immediately turned all of my energy and the resources of my campaign toward building an organization that supported candidates for local level office all across the state of New York. And then ultimately, over 4 years, we've built this to a nationwide organization that supports local level candidates called Trailblazers PAC. With that organization up and running and doing very well, with an executive director hired and staff available, I have found myself with the opportunity to throw my hat back in the ring and run for state Senate again. And I'm very enthusiastic about this race, partly because, sadly enough, none of the issues that I raised back in 2016 have been addressed in the intervening 4 years. We deserve better and we can do better. I am going to wrap it up there, I think, Jim, because I think I'm supposed to only speak for a few minutes so that we can get on to the rest of the folks in this race. But I will just note that I seem to be the only person who wants to run for this state Senate seat on the Democratic side, which means that I could really use all of your help. I'm looking visually at my fellow candidates here, but I'm speaking particularly to the Democratic committee members who are out there listening in. We have a very tough race ahead of us. My opponent is an entrenched incumbent with a lot of power and resources on his side. This is a victory that is very much in the realm of possibility, but it's going to require every single one of us to take advantage of the opportunity to grab it. So I could really use your assistance, and hope you'll get in touch with my campaign through leslieforsenate.com and stay in touch.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you. And thanks for running. It takes a lot of energy and courage, as all the people who are running for these seats in the Assembly and the DA's race know. So thanks for being willing to step up and step out.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Very good. And let me just say, and I'll mention this a couple of times, that one of the things that we're doing, have been doing anyway, and now it's even more important, is we will be posting all the candidates' information in the uncontested races, like as in Leslie's case, or Jim Barber in the district that covers in the eastern part of the county, and other uncontested races. We will be posting all that information for their candidates' events and plans and the ways you can participate on it, once again, on the social media sites. But we also use a site, and believe me, we'll be making you aware of this, called Mobilize America. And that Mobilize site will give you not only the information of when there's going to be phone banks or other events that you can help with, but it allows you to sign up so that you can participate in them. So be looking for that kind of information for Leslie's campaign. And we all need to, this is a year when everybody needs to pitch in from here on in. In fact, one of the things that I'll just briefly mention that I think we should all feel very positive about, no matter who you supported and what your disappointments may be, is that we now are unified at the national level with Bernie Sanders' very generous endorsement of Joe Biden. And of course, Barack Obama made his endorsement today. So we have a unified ticket at the top on the national level, and we want to carry that spirit and that energy all the way through to the local level, and we need to, there's no question, I'm sure, and anybody listening to this and any of your friends and family that are, Democrats, progressives, or even moderate and sane individuals, that we need to make a big change in this November, starting at the top. So with that all said, let's move ahead to the to the DA portion of the race. And we'll start with opening statements. Matt, you can, did you have something for me, Jennifer?
Yeah, Jim, can you just make an announcement that Ted said that for some reason we're not able to let in as many people as we thought. There's some problem with Zoom. And
Right.
So he thought maybe if some people wouldn't mind going over to
Right.
YouTube, we could let more people in, but I don't know, it might just also be okay.
Right. So I meant to say that, by the way, I apologize. We signed up for a level of Zoom that should have gotten us 500 people. And apparently it's bouncing people at 100, and we apologize for that. There's a message on your screen now from Ted that, what the YouTube address for the live stream on YouTube is. And you can once again go to our website and our social media and pick that up. And we do apologize, but this is the era we live in, and we know that this is not all gonna go perfectly, but so far, so good. So let's start with Matt Van Houten's opening statement. Matt, the floor is yours. You got to unmute yourself, Matt, in your upper.
I got it. There we go.
No, I think he's got himself.
He's got to do it
muted.
himself.
Yeah. You put your cursor in the upper corner, right-hand corner of your screen.
He's good now, Jim.
He's live.
Okay.
I was getting a message that the host had muted me. So now I'm good. You can hear me?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So I have 3 minutes, right?
Yep.
So, thank you. My name is Matt Van Houten, and I'm running for re-election as the Tompkins County District Attorney. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I went to Dryden High School, then graduated from West Point in 1989. After serving on active duty in the Army, I attended Albany Law School. I've been a trial lawyer in New York for 24 years. From my first day as an attorney, I've been in the courtroom and tried countless cases in family court, in Supreme Court, local courts, and most importantly in county court. County court is where the felony criminal trials are heard. I have valuable perspective from both sides of the aisle in county court, having represented individuals charged with crimes as a defense attorney, and also for the past 3+ years, having prosecuted cases in the felony court. As a department head, I'm responsible for preparing a budget and for supervising 16 employees. I've maintained a respectful relationship with the legislature and have been fiscally responsible while adapting to major changes based upon criminal justice reform that has taken place in the last year. In addition to my administrative duties, I've personally handled several local town courts as well as a full-time felony caseload. And I've done that because I believe it's essential for the district attorney to have a full understanding of what's happening at every level in the criminal justice system here in our community. I'm very proud of my accomplishments as a progressive prosecutor. Under my leadership, the district attorney's office has embraced the wide array of alternatives to incarceration that make up the foundation of our community's values. I was on the task force for mental health court, and my office is fully engaged both in felony treatment court and misdemeanor treatment court. Now, public safety is the overarching goal as district attorney. How do we define that term? In some cases, it does mean incarceration. However, for most people who struggle with substance abuse disorders or mental illness, incarceration is not the answer. The community is far better served by helping those individuals who are in the criminal justice system because of addiction or mental illness. Putting those people in jail doesn't help, doesn't solve anything. If we can help people become healthy and stable, we help their families and we help the community become a better place to live. Since taking office, my policy on bail has been presumptive release for nonviolent crimes, including felony cases. No one should be incarcerated because they cannot afford cash bail. That's not fair. That's been my policy all along. Now, our jail can hold 82 people. As of this afternoon, there were 26 people in our jail. That's not because of bail reform. It's because my office has made it a priority to use jail as an absolute last resort and only when necessary. I strongly believe in decriminalizing lower level nonviolent crimes and giving people second chances in life. Tompkins County has been a model for progressive prosecution, which is absolutely in the interest of public safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for sticking to the time. Ed? You'll need to unmute yourself, Ed. I think it's in the upper right-hand corner of your screen if you move your cursor up there.
There, good evening.
Good evening.
Jim, thank you, and thank you for the committee for providing this opportunity to have a participatory meeting even during this pestilence and making our democracy work. I hope that everyone is safe during this pandemic. We can kill this virus with kindness if we're just kind to each other, respectful to each other, and it will run its course. I'm Ed Kopko. I'm running for district attorney. I was raised in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was a police officer in Alaska on the Fairbanks City Police Department. There I saw some very honorable police officers that were instantly ready to risk their lives to help people. I also saw some rogue officers that were willing to plant evidence and to be deceitful and to frame people. I was a lieutenant in the United States Navy in the JAG Corps. I saw the efficient operation of large law firms and know how they work. I worked for the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, investigating judges in the state of New York. I saw some wonderfully conscientious and honorable judges, and also saw some judges that had no business being on the bench. I worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office as a clerk for the Organized Crime Task Force, working with the FBI, mostly doing some reviewing of transcripts, surveillance tapes made by the FBI. And I was an assistant district attorney where I saw some extraordinarily conscientious prosecutors doing their jobs, and also saw some prosecutors that were only interested in maintaining the status quo. I have a firmly held belief that trust is the cornerstone of the criminal justice system. Trust between the community, all aspects of the community, LGBTQIA, and every other aspect of the community with the prosecutor's office. This trust is the cornerstone of the legitimacy and the moral competency of the prosecutor's office. And without that trust, there is no faith in the criminal justice system. It's my goal to return that trust and reflect community values so that we don't have protests in front of the courthouse about prosecutorial decisions.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, so the first question is on bail reform. What changes, if any, would you make to New York's bail reform laws? Why or why not? And we'll go in reverse order to start with. We'll start with Ed and then go to Matt.
Initially, I was very enthusiastic about the bail reforms that were passed and were in effect starting on January 1st. Those reforms addressed and remedied decades of abuse of the system, where poor people were put in jail and rich people were allowed to post bail. The people that were in jail had to wait sometimes months, sometimes even years, because they could not make bail. It was an embarrassment to our criminal justice system. And I was in favor of maintaining all of that. Just last week, the legislature and the governor made substantial changes to the bail reform system. And although it is still workable, it increased the number of crimes that people could be jailed awaiting trial. I would do my part to remedy that by very quickly scheduling trial for people that are incarcerated, so they don't have the ill effect of being poor.
Matt. Should be in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. There you go.
I was on it, Jim, but the host had still muted me. So we'll work it out. The bail reform that happened, that took effect January 1st, did not hit Tompkins County in the way that it hit many upstate counties because of what I described earlier about my policy of presumptive release on the individual's own recognizance. Our jail population didn't get down to 26 people because of the bail reform. That being said, there were some offenses that were not qualified offenses. In other words, they were not eligible for bail in the initial draft of that legislation. Last week, some of those offenses that should have been eligible for bail were added, and I think that's okay. That's a good step by the legislature to include some violent offenses that are sexual in nature, offenses where someone died as a result of criminal conduct. The presumption is still to use the least restrictive means possible to ensure the person's appearance in court. And that's our policy, and my policy is to ensure that the individuals who are charged with a crime are treated fairly. And we only ask for bail when the person is a true flight risk.
Okay, thanks. The next question then is, how well do you think alternatives to incarceration programs and services, helps when your phone doesn't go dark, how well do you think alternatives to incarceration programs and services are working to divert people from jail and prison? How would you increase success in that program if you think it's successful? Matt, you can go first.
Great, thank you. I think our ATIs are working very well. There are a couple of things I would change to add to our toolbox of ATIs. One would be to expand our mental health court to include nonviolent felony offenses. And that's going to happen. That will happen with my office's support. As I mentioned, I was on the task force that created the mental health court. Additionally, I'm really hopeful that the law enforcement assisted diversion program will be implemented in 2020 or soon. And that's a significant way that our community can decriminalize low-level nonviolent offenses so that those individuals never get arrested, they never get booked, they're never in the system, and they're connected with the services that they need. Those are things that we can do. We're ready to do them, and I hope will happen very shortly. Jim, you're on mute.
That's it. There you go. Sorry about that. That's Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Think of the district attorney as the gatekeeper to the criminal justice system. The district attorney makes decisions about who's going to be prosecuted and what crimes are going to be prosecuted. There are vast implications from those decisions. If people are properly charged in the first instance, if more reliance is made upon misdemeanors, a great many of those people that enter the criminal justice system can be diverted to other programs that don't end them up in jail. I personally think that jail is reserved for the people that we are afraid of, people that hurt us, people that harm us. Regrettably, a lot of those people can't be around us. Those are the people that jail is for. The vast majority of other people deserve individualistic justice. They deserve to get into the type of program that will help them. People with drug abuse problems are not defendants, they're patients. People with mental health issue problems, they are not prisoners. They need help. And I would follow those programs and develop the diversionary programs to address what are real social problems and not criminal problems.
Thanks, Ed. In light of the raise the age reforms, helps if I could read, the district attorney has the authority to remove the majority of felonies committed by juveniles from criminal court to family court. How will you determine when to remove such cases to family court? This time, Ed goes first.
Vast research supports the conclusion that the minds of juveniles are not fully developed. The minds of juveniles are affected by toxic stress. The minds of juveniles are affected by trauma. The minds of juveniles are subject to uncontrollable impulsivity. The minds of juveniles do not understand the consequences of their personal actions. And finally, the minds of juveniles do not understand the consequences to society. Because of this, these young people deserve special consideration of their socioeconomic background, special consideration of the underlying facts that bring them into the criminal justice system. I would scrupulously look at all of these circumstances before making any decision that could tattoo a juvenile with a felony conviction for the rest of his or her life.
Matt.
Thank you. Before I became district attorney, I was an attorney for children for 20 years. I represented children in juvenile delinquency proceedings, custody cases, and the serious charges where the law has provided for treatment of a child in criminal court. Because of that background, I personally handle every raise the age case, and that is now for a 16 or 17-year-old who is charged with a felony offense. All misdemeanor offenses are automatically transferred to family court, and that's fantastic. There are felony charges start out in a specialized part of county court, and I've handled probably a dozen of those cases in the last 2 years. And every single case was transferred to family court with the exception of one, which was nearly a homicide. That case was especially brutal. It was a stabbing case involving very heinous injuries. And that case actually was disposed of without a felony conviction. It was a felony adjudication as a youthful offender, which is another layer of protection for the juveniles. But that's how I would handle those cases because I am handling them now. So thank you.
Okay, next question. How and when should the DA's office solicit feedback from the community? What should the DA's office do to engage the community on a regular basis? We'll start with Matt this time.
Great, thank you. When a community member reaches out to me, I speak to them. I answer the phone. I meet with them. I have sought out members of the public who were representing criminal defendants. We can do better at that. We can have town halls, and I'm hopeful that we will have a town hall that was promised to us by the mayor to talk about some of the systemic biases in our community, and they do exist. That's a major issue that we need to talk about, and I'm 100% willing to engage in those uncomfortable conversations. My door is always open, and I always answer my phone, but we can be more organized with outreach to the community.
Ed.
Yes, none of these topics that were just discussed have occurred over the last 3 years. I would change that dramatically. I would reach out to the community. And one of the first things that I would do is form an advisory committee to review and interview all of my assistants to make certain that my assistants were reflecting community values and community goals. I would establish a review of all of the types of cases that came into my office to make certain that there was no racial disparities in the prosecution of those cases, and that everyone in my office would be trained to recognize and to deal with implicit racial bias. And that not only applies to racial matters, but also applies to the LGBTQIA community that have suffered their own abuse through the criminal justice system. And I would address that immediately.
Thank you. The next question, should police be allowed to directly file charges, or should all charges be reviewed by a prosecutor before filing? Ed goes first.
Yeah, I would adopt a policy that all of the charges would have to be reviewed. From my experience as a police officer and my experience as a prosecutor, there are many instances where the police overcharge on a case. That actually happened in the case on the Commons here, where the police overcharged with felonies. The district attorney then reduced those felonies to misdemeanors, then met with the Ithaca police, and then went back and indicted the young woman that was involved on that before the grand jury on the same felony charges that were previously dismissed. I would review those policies and have my staff available to assist the police in bringing proper charges.
Matt.
Thank you. To have a prosecutor's office review every single criminal charge before it is filed is simply impractical and reflects a lack of understanding of how the criminal justice system works. Certainly, we work with the police when they have questions about a case, when they're investigating a case, when there's a higher level felony case. Those cases need to be reviewed prior to filing of charges, and we do that. But there were 1,500 misdemeanor charges in city court last year. That's simply impossible for a prosecutor's office to review every single charge. We review them after they're charged, and we screen out a lot of those charges, especially the low-level non-violent offenses. We take a lot of steps to make sure that those people don't end up with criminal records.
Thank you. This next question is a long question, but I think it's an important one. The recent situation involving several young people of color being arrested on the Commons and the tumult that ensued ultimately ended in a decision by Judge Rowley that concluded that, in quotes, Ithaca police officers overreacted to the initial situation, end quote, and that, in quotes, the prosecuting attorney has demonstrated ambivalence about the case, end of quote. What can we do moving forward to prevent something like this from happening again? How do you intend to ensure both yourself and the officers with whom you must have trust to effectively keep our community safe are better prepared to handle these situations moving forward? Matt.
Well, everybody involved in that situation is a human being, and everyone makes mistakes. And to be frank, everybody in that case made mistakes, including myself, including the police. That's a case that I would have handled differently in retrospect. Going forward, we need to talk about that. We need to understand the perspectives of all the people involved in that case, and we need to do better. And by doing better, it's by engaging in those conversations. I can't take back what happened. Nobody can. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say, I would not do that. I would do things differently. And at no point in that case were either of these young people at risk of being criminalized. That's a really important fact to remember. But you can't take back how it happened.
Ed?
Yeah, nothing that happened in this case was a mistake. These were intentional prosecutorial decisions. The district attorney made an intentional decision to present evidence that he had already concluded did not support a felony. He nonetheless presented that evidence to a grand jury, and he indicted this young woman on a felony after he dismissed those charges. These people were totally innocent from the very beginning. There was never a proper investigation of the white drunk guy that instigated all of this stuff. There was never a proper investigation of the apparent misconduct and overreaction by the Ithaca Police Department. These people were victimized. These two young Black people were mercilessly victimized and had a felony charge pending over her until Judge Rowley had the courage to say that the district attorney was ambivalent and that the police overreacted. That was the only proper case here. And if there were mistakes made, Mr. Van Outen made the mistakes, and he did it intentionally.
Okay, next question. How much prosecutorial discretion will you give to assistant district attorneys, and how much personal oversight will you have over their actions, decisions? Ed?
My assistants will have very little discretion because there will be a blanket policy in effect of how individuals that come into the criminal justice system are going to be handled. Everyone is entitled to respect, most particularly the victims in cases, and especially here in our county with LGBTQIA people that can be viciously abused. Those people are the first consideration. Then the defendants need a consideration so that their constitutional rights are observed. And my assistants will be specifically identified and chosen and trained to reflect community values, because that's the system that I will have in place. The current district attorney's office does not have the sort of diversity that is reflective of our community.
Matt?
Well, I trust the assistant district attorneys who work for me in my office. I take issue with the statement that they do not reflect the values of the community. I have hired almost all of the assistant DAs who work for me, and they are from this community. They are raising children in this community. They understand and they embrace the values of this community. And to say that they would have no discretion or very little discretion is completely impractical. Every case is different. Every case requires an attorney to learn about the facts, to spend the time to understand the dynamics of the individuals, to talk to the victims, to understand what happened and what was going on with the defendant and what issues they may have been dealing with. You can't just put those things into policies. You have to spend the time on an individual case. And I trust my assistant DAs to do that because they are from this community, and they are 50% women, and they are as diverse a group as I could possibly have put together.
Okay, this will be the last question for the DAs, and that question is, how will you handle allegations of misconduct or undue influence between law enforcement and the prosecutor's offices? And do you think this is currently a problem in Tompkins County? Starts with Matt.
So we have prosecuted police officers during my term. We have uncovered police misconduct in certain cases, there was a case of the Ithaca Police Department investigator who illegally searched a premises and lied under oath. We uncovered that during our preparation for trial, and I was personally involved in that. The first thing that we did was bring that case to the judge and move to dismiss the charges. And the second thing that we did was ask for a special prosecutor. And the reason why I asked for a special prosecutor is because I and two other assistant DAs in my office were witnesses. And ethics 101 for lawyers is that you cannot be a prosecutor in a case when you are a witness. It's really important when there is an appearance of impropriety that the prosecutor who's handling a case is above reproach and there is no suspicion or appearance that there's any relationship between a police officer and a prosecutor. And that's why I have asked for special prosecutors in the past, and I've done that for other counties on a regular basis.
Ed.
Trust is the cornerstone between the community and the prosecutor. Here, in this case, Mr. Van Outen disqualified himself in the prosecution of an Ithaca police officer. Mr. Van Outen disqualified himself in the prosecution of a Tompkins County deputy sheriff. When that happens, it creates in the minds of the community that there is partiality, and that destroys the trust. Vast research supports the conclusion that people are more likely to be compliant with court orders if they respect the court system. When you disqualify yourself from the prosecution of a police officer, you erode that trust. I will never do that. Police officers, nor anyone else, is above the law, nor anyone else is below the law. And that's the policy that I would have. I would not disqualify myself from the prosecution of a police officer.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. And now you have 1 minute each for your concluding statements, and we'll start with Ed.
Today, I call upon the community to join with me to start a progressive criminal justice system where everyone, minorities, women, LGBTQIA, everyone in our community feels as though they have a fair shot at justice. And it is up to us to have this type of criminal justice system, because it only works when we can hold people accountable that actually need to be held accountable. The rest of the people make mistakes, and they're entitled to a fair evaluation of all of their circumstances so that we can cut down on the prison population, so that we can cut down on the number of people on probation. And all of this will result in substantial savings to the taxpayers. And thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I hope it wasn't too obvious that I cut my own hair for this. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Ed. I'm having the same problem myself. If my hair gets any longer, I'm going to have to get my disco records out or something. Matt.
All right, thank you. Being a prosecutor is about doing the right thing. It is about integrity and ethics. The prosecutor's job is not to win at all costs, and the ends do not justify the means. It's about listening with an open mind. Almost every case that comes into the courthouse involves tragedy, pain, unhappiness, and solutions that make everyone happy in a criminal case are extremely rare. If you check your ego at the door, treat people with dignity and respect, and make thoughtful, careful decisions, people will at least know that you've done your best and they'll respect your decisions. Now, I alone am responsible for my decisions as district attorney. That's a responsibility that I accept wholeheartedly because I love my community and I'm committed to continuing the progress that we've made during my first term. So I would be honored to serve another 4 years as your district attorney. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt Van Houten, and thanks, Ed Kopko, for your participation. Let me mention now, and I'll do so again after we have the assembly forum, that if there is sufficient interest, and you can let us know by going to our, all those sites that I keep referring to, and give us messaging us, and for that matter, emailing us and so on. If there's sufficient interest, we can do another forum with like this, or just with the DA candidates, and then another forum certainly with the assembly candidates. Now that we have this more technology more or less set up, we'll find out why we were limited to 100 participants. We'll get that fixed. But we have the, once again, if you have been blocked out and you didn't hear this earlier, you can go to the live stream. And there's no limit on the YouTube live stream, and it is all being recorded, so you'll be able to watch later. So with that having been said, thank you to both the DA candidates, and now we'll move to the assembly forum, and we'll start with the opening statements once again for 3 minutes. And I'm just going to go across the screen as people appear to me. And if I forget somebody, raise your hand, or Jennifer will certainly bring it to my attention, I'm sure. We'll start with Sepp Murtaugh.
Thank you very much, Jim. I want to thank everybody who worked to put this forum together. I know this isn't the way that we thought we would be meeting, but I'm very glad that we can make this connection. So as Jim said, my name is Sepp Murtaugh, and I'm running for the New York State Assembly. And I wanted to talk tonight about how I first got involved in politics and why I want to be your next state assembly representative. So my first foray into the political world came during another dark time in American history. This was about going back to 2007, 2008. I was a graduate student at Cornell studying English literature, and I was looking around the world and seeing all the terrible things that were happening at that time. So this was the Iraq War and Hurricane Katrina. It just seemed like one thing after another, and it got to a point where I really felt like I just had to do something. And I wasn't sure what that something was. I didn't really have any political connections, but I had a friend who was working at the Tompkins County Worker Center, and I reached out to her. And she told me about how the Democrats were gearing up to take over the majority of the New York State Senate. And I went online and I read about it, and turned out that the Working Families Party was hiring field organizers to work on the campaigns that year because they were working with the Democrats. And I applied, and much to my astonishment, and I think to the horror of my dissertation committee, I was hired. And I piled all my belongings into my car. I drove up to Rochester, New York. My office was the UAW Hall on Dewey Ave. And it was a decision that changed my life. And over the next year, I got a crash course in New York State government. I worked 90 days straight on a state Senate campaign, only to see our candidate lose by about 5,000 votes. I was the regional coordinator on a statewide initiative to push the state of New York to raise income taxes on the wealthy. And those experiences stayed with me. And a few years later, when a seat opened up on the Ithaca Common Council, I decided to run, and I was elected. And that was trial by fire, because the budget that we confronted was the worst city budget in living memory. And I remember arguing with my council colleagues long into the night over consolidations of city departments and strategic budget cuts. But we also didn't give up on our vision for the city of Ithaca. As chair of the planning committee, I led an effort to change our zoning to attract more housing and businesses to our community. I helped lobby the state and federal governments for funding to rebuild the commons and upgrade our infrastructure. And we weathered that crisis. Now we find ourselves in the grips of a new crisis of unprecedented scope. And I can tell you, over the last few weeks, I have heard from people all across this assembly district about the terrible toll that this pandemic is taking. These are incredibly challenging times, and the next few years are going to be difficult. That's why it's so important that we elect a pragmatic leader with a strong track record of accomplishments to go to bat in Albany. And I would not be speaking with you tonight if I did not feel that I was up to the job. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sepp. Next, Sujata Gibson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sujata Gibson. I'm an attorney, an activist, and a part-time law professor at Cornell Law School, where I teach in the area of civil rights and the politics of change. I was born and raised in the 125th district. My husband and I moved back 9 years ago so he could help out on his family farm in Brooktondale and so we could raise our kids here. I'm running for office because we need radical change, and we need it now. This system was built to protect the interests of the elite, and it's done an excellent job of doing that. But now, as we sit on the verge of the greatest depression this country may ever see, it's time to build a system that actually works to protect all of us. I've worked on change from the inside. After law school, I went to the premier government contracts firm in the country, and I've worked on legislation at the state and national level. I've sat on many boards and many committees. But more important than my experience working in the system, in my opinion, is my experience bucking the system. My primary focus for the last 20 years has been organizing and fighting for justice. I began my career as a union organizer 20 years ago. And since then, I've fought for prisoners' rights, environmental justice. I was the lead attorney on the We Are Seneca Lake campaign locally, and I continue to be active in many movements today. When I announced my candidacy, I pointed out that all our systems are on the verge of collapse. That was back in February. A couple weeks later, a coronavirus has completely overwhelmed our fragile healthcare system and toppled our economy. There are two ways that we can go at the end of this pandemic. To be on the right path, we have to stop trying the failed system of trickle-down economics and compromise politics that have got us here in the first place. Our small businesses and our local economies need to be our #1 priority. We need to take care of each other. We need universal health care. We need a real solution to the childcare crisis. We need to draw the line in the sand so that we stand firm against any violation of human rights, civil rights, or erosions of civil liberties. We also have to stop spending $11.3 billion a year, which is what we've been doing on corporate welfare, and start spending that on actually creating jobs. We've got plenty of work to do here, shoring up our system. We can create, we can put people to work building geothermal systems, weatherizing our homes, making small-scale electrical grids and backup systems. We want to shore up our healthcare system and lead worker-led cooperatives, put in infrastructure for that. The bottom line is we are the most progressive assembly district in this state, and we've got to be the most progressive, leading the most progressive policies in Albany. I'm ready to get to work doing that, and I won't stop until we make the changes we so desperately need.
Thank you. Next, Jordan Lesser.
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Jordan Lesser. Like many of the candidates here, I grew up in Ithaca. I went to high school and college here, and I really love this community. It was here that I developed a strong passion for environmental protection. I went after undergrad to become a national park ranger, and I actually lived in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina. It was there when I realized, as we went to rescue families and saw the widespread environmental destruction of the area, that these were problems that could be solved, that could be changed. That led me to go to Tulane Law School and specialize in environmental law to try to make a difference in the policy arena. When I came back to Ithaca after that experience, I reached out to Barbara Lifton, to find an opportunity to work in this area, work on state policy to make a difference. And I've ended up working for her as her legislative counsel for the past 10 years. That involved most legislative accomplishments you can think of over that time, including banning fracking to protect the beauty and our economy of the region, the invasive species transport law. More recently, creating a third county court judge here in Tompkins County, allowing the county to use its money to increase our affordable housing in the area, a very important issue. And as we say, housing costs skyrocket around Ithaca area. Also to block a waste incinerator in the Finger Lakes to protect our wineries and our agriculture. So, when I get to Albany, I want to use this environmental experience to craft and work on a strong climate action plan. Right now, 4% of our energy comes from renewable sources. We need to get that to 70% based on a recent law that passed last year. The only way we're going to do that is to reduce our demand, our energy demand. And I've worked with the Assemblywoman on a plan to weatherize and insulate all of our homes across the state. This will both reduce costs for homeowners, and it will create a lot of jobs here in our community and everywhere where we need to do this. In order to train people, now we're facing coronavirus, right? Many people are unemployed. We actually have great worker training facilities here in our community, at TC3 at BOCES, and also a lot of entrepreneurship that comes out of our other universities, including in Cortland, with a strong nursing program and education school. These jobs can be created here. We're in a great position to do this. I will also fight for single-payer healthcare. Now it's clearer than ever that healthcare needs to be a right and not a privilege. We can tax millionaires to pay for all of these initiatives. And thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jordan. Next, Bo Harbin. I think you're muted right now, Bo.
Yep. There we go. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to join my fellow candidates tonight. As was mentioned, my name is Bo Harbin. I'm currently a legislator and the minority leader in the Cortland County Legislature. Just a bit about myself. I've been a global manager for an international software company for over 18 years. I've also been a full-time remote worker before remote working was cool. Our family found that because I could work from anywhere, we had the flexibility to move from Northern Virginia to Cortland about 13 years ago, so that my wife could pursue her career as a professor at SUNY Cortland. Our family loves living in central New York, and I felt strongly that I wanted to give back to this community, which has so warmly embraced us. In my time in the Cortland County Legislature, I've come to recognize that our region and our community are not alone. By working with other elected officials in the New York Association of Counties, I've seen that we share many of the same challenges. Beyond New York, we also have many similarities to other Appalachian and rural communities. We share many of the same issues with healthcare, access to job opportunities, economic development, education, budget woes, lack of rural broadband, and much more. Learning from others, finding best practices, and making connections across our community, our state, and our wider region is important to me. And this is why I decided to become an Appalachian Leadership Institute Fellow, and it is also why I've decided to run for the Assembly. I'll bring my proven, principled, and progressive leadership to Albany to help address what I see as the top 3 issues facing our community and our state. First of all, the budget. The budget approved this year is another punch in the gut for local communities and for marginalized New Yorkers. It didn't complete some of the important work that must get done to put New York on the right footing. It did not expand childcare, and it did not fully fund our education system. Albany failed to pass key legislation that has been languishing for years, which would improve our communities, such as the legalization of adult use cannabis that would give farmers a much needed boost. Through unfunded mandates, Albany continues to put an unfair burden onto our upstate rural communities, communities that are already fully stretched. And as a county legislator, I deal with these challenges every day. Second, the New York Health Act. As we've seen with this pandemic, healthcare is an essential human need and a human right. We have the opportunity here in New York to make sure that we cover everyone, and we can do it for a lower cost for all New Yorkers. Passing the New York Health Act would also allow everyone the personal freedom to pursue their interests and their passions. Being locked into a job simply out of fear to keep some semblance of high-cost healthcare is not freedom, and it is easily lost, as so many Americans have seen in the past month. And the third issue, rural broadband. There are a lot of other issues that are going to be discussed tonight, I'm sure, but this one is near and dear to my heart because we need to see and we need to fix the issue of rural broadband. This pandemic has put into high relief for all of us that there is a deep digital divide in New York and in our country. We've seen this across the Appalachian region as well. But I've also witnessed the opportunities when it's truly expanded as a critical utility, and I do believe it should be a public utility. We can increase access to higher paying jobs, remote working, delivery of telemedicine, new entrepreneurship opportunity, expanding education for our children, and so much more. To these issues and so many others facing our community and our state, I'll bring to Albany my leadership and experience as an IT professional, a proven manager, an Appalachian leader, and a progressive county legislator to fight for the residents of Tompkins at Cortland County. Thank you.
Jim, you're muted.
So, okay. Lisa Hochul, thank you.
Sure. So I'm Lisa Herschel. I'm running for Assembly in the 125th District in Cortland and Tompkins counties. I have spent my entire career in public service. I have worked as a teacher. I have worked in public television. I've worked at Tompkins Cortland Community College raising money for scholarships for people in need and for individuals who want to recreate their lives and hadn't had the chance earlier to do that. Right now, however, I am the director of a $15 million mental health and addictions clinic. And I really want to highlight what I've been doing since COVID has hit our communities, because it highlights what I think I bring to the table here. No, what I know I bring to the table here when it comes to policy marrying implementation on the ground. We've been evolving our 4 clinics to telehealth, and have now been able to ramp up our support for our communities, where we are seeing 350 people a day who have mental health and addictions needs via telehealth. But interestingly enough, when we started this voyage towards telehealth, the Office of Mental Health and the Office of Alcohol Substance Abuse, which were giving us the opportunity to provide these services to our clients via telehealth, we're absolutely unaware of the fact that the majority of our clients have flip phones provided to them by Medicaid that do not support the minutes, the time, or the bandwidth that they needed to be able to access services via telehealth. The policy was being implemented in Albany with no understanding of what happens on the ground and how that's implemented. So frankly, that's what I bring to the table in this assembly race, an understanding of what the individuals on the ground are dealing with as policymakers are making policy. I've also been working with the ARC, just as Bo has and Anna has. I'm on the Southern Tier 8 Recovery to Work initiative, and we've been having constant conversations around how we can continue to make sure that those who are in recovery are able to access the opportunity to work now and after this COVID crisis is over. And to be honest with you, I've been working with Senator Gillibrand's office, with Senator Schumer's office, with Anthony Brindisi's office, who happens to be the Cortland congressman, to make sure that anything that happens when it comes to the SBA support and the support for the Small Business Association loans and services that are being provided happen also to benefit the nonprofit community, because that was not something that was going to happen in the initial legislation. I feel that my support for the small business community, for the rural community, and for policy on the ground as it's implemented is something that Albany needs right now.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, Jason Leifer.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the Tompkins Democrats for organizing this forum. If you're looking at YouTube and what we have on Zoom, I think we have 300 people viewing, which is amazing considering what's been going on. And it's more participation, I think, than we've ever had for any of these forums. But experience on the ground and progressive policymaking are exactly why I am running. I'm the town supervisor for the town of Dryden. I've been on the board for 12 years. I also got into local government when we had a financial crisis. I'm an attorney. I work in the criminal and family courts here. And I moved here 15 years ago with my wife and my first son, Ryan, and we then had a second, Daniel, here. And they're both in local schools. So, but during my tenure in Dryden, I think people have seen Dryden go from a Republican town to the progressive leader, I think, in central New York. We're very pragmatic about it, though. And since I joined the board in Dryden, we banned fracking. We've brought renewable energy to Dryden through 30 megawatts of solar projects. We stopped new fossil fuel infrastructure from coming in by banning the West Dryden pipeline, which is why now the Hugo power plant's being turned into a data center. We were the first municipality in the county after the the Orlando shootings to declare June Pride Month and fly the rainbow flag, and you know, it was in support of our LGBTQ plus community. When I became supervisor, one of the first things we did as a board was vote in favor of a living wage, and because we wanted the county to pass that, because as we're finding out now, our essential workers, they're very essential, but we're not paying them enough. We're asking them to go to work every single day to feed us, but we're still not willing to make sure they can pay their rent and take care of their kids and things without struggling. We always supported our local businesses. We have our own revolving loan fund. We've done things like weatherization before they became an idea came out of the state. And now we're moving into the we start thinking about the post-COVID-19 days right now. And we already did that in Dryden too. We're already building on our way to building our own municipal broadband system. I want to bring that kind of forward thinking and vision to Albany. Because the old way of thinking is what led us to the budget we have now. We had the leadership in Albany give us a budget that looks more like what you'd find in Mississippi. It failed to provide for healthcare. It failed to provide for local services. It failed to provide meaningful funding for climate change fights. So what you get from me is someone who can look ahead, plan ahead, and really bring this new perspective to Albany, to bring the values of our progressive community to Albany, and to be a leader so that we can work with our downstate assembly people to then make the governor do what the governor should be doing, and making New York truly the most progressive state in the country. And the first step to that is I think, passing and signing the New York Health Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Anna Kellis.
Hi, Jim. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for putting this all together. I agree. This is an amazing feat. So thank you. It is a step forward for democracy for sure in this new age. My name is Anna Kellis. I'm a Tompkins County legislator, and I have been preparing for this work my entire life. My work has been dedicated, my education has been dedicated to people health and planet health, and I really feel like that is the theme of tonight. That's the theme of this job. That's the theme of the work that needs to be done. My undergraduate degree was environmental studies at Binghamton University, and I then became a guide in the Amazon jungle for a while, which sounds like a very far-reaching, maybe disconnected, but actually the work was quite incredible because my focus was ensuring nutrition and health for people in an area where the environment was being destroyed. And that created a fundamental passion and basis for the graduate work that I did. I got a doctoral degree in nutritional epidemiology, which is coming quite handy in this COVID epidemic, actually, understanding and translating what we're going through. But that work brought me back home where I came to teach here health and nutrition at Cornell University. But I also started doing activism work while I was here, both at Crestwood to prevent the expansion of natural gas storage in Seneca Lake. And as many people have seen, the work that I did at that time was to try and get adaptive reuse development and housing in downtown Ithaca. What I saw at the time was a need for an expanded transparency in our legislature, and was urged at that time to run for our county legislature. So I became a legislator in 2015, fought from a race from the outside as an independent Democrat, and have been on the legislature for 5 years, again, continuing my work in people health and planet health, which are so critical, whether it be fighting for immigrants' rights, whether it include alternatives to incarceration and expanding alternatives to incarceration, expanding diversity of housing and access to affordable housing. These are some of the issues that I've fought for. Also issues like preventing the use of the Cayuga power plant and converting it to natural gas usage, or the incinerator, blocking the incinerator in Romulus. These are some efforts that I've worked on hard over the last couple of years for the community, listening to the community, hearing what the community wants, engaging with the community, and then championing and fighting for those things. And I feel that that is fundamentally the role of a legislator, is not just to think intellectually of what you see as the problems, but to hear it and to fight for it. At the state, what I want to fight for and will fight for is to reinvigorate our economy with environmental jobs. That is absolutely critical. And what must be in place is the focus on childcare and healthcare. The New York Health Act must pass. We have seen that at the federal level, we have the will, we have the money. We just need to put that will and apply it to where it needs to be, which is healthcare for all. We also need to have childcare at the table, because if we don't have childcare, we will not be able to come back to work. So those are absolutely critical pieces, and I will fight for those when I'm in Albany. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And thank all of you for running. An incredible group of very talented people we have here, and we should all be thankful that we have all of you willing to step up and run for Barbara Lifton's seat. And of course, we should acknowledge what a great job Barbara Lifton has done for Tompkins County for 20 years, and we appreciate her service. And so you're stepping into a large history of accomplishment and leadership on progressive values. So the first question here is, what would your priorities for a recovery plan to rebuild from the COVID-19 crisis? What would be your priorities for a recovery plan to rebuild from the COVID-19 crisis? What policies would you like to see implemented that would help out our local community? And we'll go first in reverse order, starting with Anna Kellis.
Thank you, Jim. I think one of the things that absolutely needs to be in place is a focus on recreation or reinvigorating the economy with a focus on the environment. We, in the last budget that just came out, that was an emphasis, and we also know that there has been a focus with the environmental task force that has been put in place. But the guidelines from that aren't expected to come out for several years. We need to start now with those initiatives, invigorate our economy, very similar, like a Roosevelt-style New Deal. We need jobs, and that is the arena to do it. That is my first focus. Weatherization of houses, upgrading our transmission lines, having manufacturing for renewable energy. All of these things are possible, and those need to be put in place. Another thing that absolutely needs to happen is a focus on childcare. As I said earlier, our childcare system was already inadequately funded, insufficient access, and insufficient affordability in those areas. If we don't have that in place, people cannot go back to work. 40% of the people who could be working in Tompkins County and Cortland County aren't, because they do not have access to childcare. So I would focus on those two things when I get to, or if you all are supporting me to get to the state, those would be two initiatives that I would focus on.
Next, Jason Leifer.
Thanks, Jim. Well, the first one would be municipal broadband. Broadband has been shown to be a necessity, not just for schools, but for business now. Many of us are telecommuting. Our kids are being educated from home. We're all homeschooling through the school district now. Green jobs. So it's not just saying we want to retrofit houses and bring in renewable energy, but we need to have anything that's funded by NYSERDA or the state. You need to have a requirement for local union jobs. I mean, the state legislation has failed on that account, so we need to fix that. And third thing really goes to healthcare. We need to make sure that everyone's covered, so that, because this COVID's not going away, it's going to be around for a while, and people need to be able to go to the doctor without worrying about going bankrupt. Right now, you can get a free test, but if you have to go to the hospital and you don't have health insurance, how are you going to pay for it? So we can have an explosion of entrepreneurship if we have single payer healthcare in New York.
Thank you. Next, Lisa Hoschel. How do you say your last name correctly, Lisa?
Well, actually, my maiden name is White, Jim. So
all right, Lisa White.
No, thank you. I think talking about healthcare is really important. We have seen through this crisis that healthcare is the most important thing that we need to be considering. And it's interesting because I've had some people say that seems like an easy answer, but it's really not. It's the most important answer. Making sure that people have healthcare allows them to investigate other options for career growth after this is over. And I don't think it's going to be over anytime soon. I think we need to be prepared for this for a very long time. I think we're all watching Andy Cuomo, who's my new lunch buddy, every day at noon. And we understand that this is 12 to 18 months of hard work. I also think, though, as some of the work I'm doing right now in helping to coordinate mask production for workers in our communities. Farm workers are asking for masks now. I think this is the time for us to really think about how we engage our farming communities in their ability to try and reinvigorate the economy and give people an opportunity to work there. It's going to be a whole new world out there. Funding is going to be of the utmost importance, and I think without somebody in Washington like FDR, we're really not going to be able to do what we need to do in any short-term situation.
Thank you. Bo Harbin.
Yep. Thanks for the question. I think it's an important one in this time on how do we come back out of this issue that we're in. A couple of things immediately spring to mind. The first and most important for me, as I mentioned earlier, is the budget. Right now, the state has decided they're going to devolve all of the expense of handling this crisis to our county levels. And all that means is that we're all going to have to foot the bill. The legislature needs to come back. Cuomo needs to get them back together. And we need to make sure that the millionaires and billionaires downstate in New York cover their fair share of the cost of helping getting all of New York State back to work. We need to bring back and expand our jobs programs, which is best handled at the county level. We can bring people to work quickly. We can get jobs out and we can get a green economy rolling fairly quickly. But we have to make sure that the cost for this isn't handled by the county. The next item, as I mentioned earlier, is also, and others have mentioned it, is the New York Health Act. This issue is not going away. We need to make sure everybody stays healthy and so that they don't go bankrupt while they're trying to deal with this health crisis. So those are a couple of key things that we need to do right off the bat to get New York moving again.
Thank you, Bo. Jordan Lesser.
Yes, sure. We know very well from the 2008 crisis that government austerity is not the right idea during economic downturn. We're facing a similar or possibly even worse crisis today. I would ask everyone initially to approve the Environmental Bond Act on the November ballot. This will already put a lot of money towards environmental infrastructure, something a few other candidates hit on. I would also push for a separate bond act for transportation infrastructure, huge backlog. We know this will put a lot of people to work immediately. It's popular and it needs to happen. And remember, bond bills, it's not like this is money that's coming out of helping other areas of our crisis. This is money that's sitting there available to bond over a period of time when the debt limit is there. I would also make sure we reduce costs for our public universities. We know during difficult economic times, many people would seek to return to school to better their lives and get better jobs. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Sujuta Gibson.
I think, it's the same stuff I was saying when I announced my candidacy. I think so many systems are about to collapse right now, and this is our opportunity to do that work, to shore them up, and to really put money into that. So instead of doing this corporate trickle-down Green New Deal, we need a direct jobs program. We need a citizens, the CCC of the FDR. We can put people to work, give each county their own money to administer, and weatherize the homes, but also put in geothermal, community geothermal, and small electrical grids that aren't going to come down at the first storm with global warming. We can use this opportunity to pay people to, really develop sustainable food plans that are going to allow our region to withstand the coming problems from global warming, food shortages, and the soil erosion problems, and then just interruptions in supply that a new economy is going to most likely leave us with. So that's what I think we should be putting our money in as a state, is solving two problems at once. One, putting people to work, but two, also getting our system more resilient so that we won't topple at the next challenge, because COVID's just the first one. We're going to have many worse ones coming soon. The other things that I think are important are getting creative about cooperative development and business loans and other things to help the small businesses.
Okay, and Setmertah.
So I agree with much of what has been said about the environment and green jobs and healthcare. I think the other big piece of this is education and workforce development. We are blessed to have some really strong educational resources in this assembly district, our school districts, BOCES, TC3, our four-year universities. And I think it's really important that we invest in them in the future, especially our community colleges. You know, TC3 has always done a great job training workers with their nursing program, the culinary program, but they do have a mission to expand on workforce development, get into the areas of public works, manufacturing, and healthcare. And I think it's important that they continue to get the support that they need from the state. All of our institutions of higher education and our pre-K through 12 education are going to be facing a lot of pressure with what's coming down the pike. So I think it's going to be important to stand strong in Albany and make sure that we are funding our educational resources and giving them the support that they need.
Thank you. The next question is, what are some policy initiatives you'd like to see included in a Green New Deal here in New York? And how would you support surrounding communities to prepare our communities for climate change and address economic, social, and racial inequality? And this time we're going to start in the middle, and I'm just going to use first names. So we'll start with Jordan.
Yes, sure. Thanks very much. You know, when I was a student at Tulane Law School, it was right after Hurricane Katrina, and I worked for the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic, and I actually represented a community that faced the worst urban oil spill in this country's history. You know, I've seen what it means to not have environmental justice. I've seen the impacts that occur far more frequently in communities of color and in low income communities. For any Green New Deal, we must be getting money back to communities who are impacted by pollution, who are impacted disproportionately by the effects of climate change. You know, obviously climate change pervades every aspect of our society. We need to make sure with this opportunity to you know, reform a large part of our transportation, our building stock, you name it. At the same time, we need to look at how we can aid our society and begin to reform some of these longstanding ills through climate policy.
Thank you. Next, Bo.
Yeah, there's a number of things that we've been doing here in Cortland that we started to move the county forward on our climate smart initiatives and policies. You know, I think the key thing that we would want to see is a return to the Works Progress Administration as they did in the 1930s, to work together in a public-private partnership to make sure that we bring in the small businesses. There is a lot of manufacturing and raw talent across our rural communities that we can tap and we can bring forward to help bring about the Green New Deal here in Portland and Tompkins County. And we've been investing in moving that forward. My work on the Southern Tier 8 Regional Planning Board has expanded across the Southern Tier to see all the different opportunities of reinvesting and revitalizing our industrial base. We have a lot of manufacturing talent. We just need to tap it for the right things. And the Green New Deal for New York is going to be a big engine to allow us to do that.
Thank you. Jason.
Thanks, Jim. Well, what you would do, I think, is make it a point to make sure that people who are implementing any of these programs come from those communities that are have been subject to, I guess, social and racial inequality. I mean, the last thing you want to do is have someone like me telling them how to solve their problems all the time. But what you need to do is provide the funding on top of that. If it's going to be, whether it's loans, grants, or what have you, there needs to be a focus on getting that money to these communities that have been affected first. You can do that by like providing the basis for starting new businesses. For if a municipality is going to hire a contractor to do some of this cleanup work or construction work, look to the leaders in those communities to and their business contacts to really make these changes happen. Climate change also affects food security, so I think that we have to focus on things that address food security for not for all of the kids in schools, for instance, who right now there are a lot of kids in the districts who are being fed by the schools, and unless we're really taking care of them and the farms that supply them, then we're not doing our job.
And Sujuda.
Well, I think a lot of the things I just mentioned, but also I think coming from this fundamental place that understanding that environmental justice and climate, health justice and all of these things really are about social and racial inequality too. And this crisis is really highlighting the disparate impact that even something like a virus has so much worse on vulnerable communities. So I do think that we need to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find Jennifer's, there you go. We do really need to bring a lot of resources and funding and attention to the fact that not everybody is coming out here with the same level of resources. So I do think funding is an issue, and we could look at creative ways through public banking and other major changes down the line, and in more short term, just recognizing that poor communities don't have as much access to credit. So all of these federal programs to help small businesses aren't necessarily going to be there in the same way for the people who really need it most. So working to expand and create grants and loans for small businesses that will really be able to benefit all people would be good. And then working on things like creative solutions like cooperative development think tanks and ways of getting workers to have agency as we go forward into this new economy.
And Lisa.
So I'm going to have nightmares about Jennifer Lyons putting up the stop sign in front of me for the next couple of days, just so you know.
Great job.
Good job, Jennifer. I think that when it comes to the Green New Deal, there's some really good stuff there. I think we need to take the time, especially knowing that we're talking about carbon neutrality by 2030, to talk to our large manufacturers to make sure that they understand how that will impact them. For example, when I talked to Heather and Margaret at TCAD, they were very insistent that there's no way Borg Warner, for example, can power up their entire plant on solar. So how do we work with our manufacturers currently to make sure that they have the time and that we develop the technology to give them the opportunity to engage in that and incentivize them with tax breaks and incentives. I also think we're missing the boat when it comes to organic farming and supporting our farmers with tax and incentives that allow them to engage in organic farming that benefits our community as well as supporting the farm community that surrounds us every single day. I think the reason that the Green New Deal is a great opportunity for us is that it gives us time to work through the processes that will be necessary to get us where we need to go. And that's going to help us economically because that's where we're going to see benefit.
Thank you. Sep.
So one policy I'd like to see is a big weatherization program. And I know that Barbara Lifton has been a big champion on this. And I agree with her. I think that this is something that we could do now. It would have a significant impact on lowering greenhouse gas emissions. A significant amount of them come from the residential sector. And it also would create a lot of jobs. And these are jobs you don't need to study for 4 or 5 years. You can study for a year, and they're high-skilled jobs, they're interesting, and they pay well. And I think absolutely those jobs should go to people who are affected by racial injustice through job training programs, for instance. So that's something I'd really like to see as a part of any climate action plan that the state enacts. Another piece that I'd like to see is building out our network of rail trails. You know, I've watched the rail trails around this county develop. It's taking them forever. It takes years and years and years to develop these. There have to be a more expedient way to get these trails developed. If we could connect all of these small upstate villages with these rail trails, it would have a big impact on reducing fossil fuels. It would also help those economies.
And Anna.
Unmute myself. Is such a list of things that we could do. I agree with many of the things that have been said before. I do also want to emphasize that there must be job training as a focus, but specifically job training in renewable energy generation, upgrading transmission lines, weatherization. All of those are jobs that could be created. So we are both, again, human health and planet health, and specifically focusing those in communities that have been disadvantaged the most. Something that was brought up briefly that I want to bring up again is that there are models of businesses that should be emphasized, like cooperative models that allow for the employees to be owners of that business model, and those should be incentivized specifically at this time. This is an opportunity. We are in a crisis now. The economy has crashed in some respects, but it is an incredible opportunity to rebuild it within a vision that we want. I also want to emphasize as well renewable agricultural systems. Those must be put in place if we are going to reach our energy goals of the greenhouse gas emissions in the 2025 and 2030 goals that we have. So the agriculture, weatherization, the renewable energy, upgrading transmission lines, all of those have job opportunities and must be part of it and can be done with all of us equally.
Okay, next question. Many of the essential workers who work in Tompkins County, grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and schools can't afford to live in Tompkins and commute in. What can you specifically do from an assembly seat to address this? This time we will start with Steph.
So I'd say that we need to increase the minimum wage in upstate New York. I mean, right now it's $15 in New York City. I think that upstate New York should get to $15 to help the very workers that Jim was mentioning. I know that there have been some efforts at the county level to pass a county level living wage. Obviously, if that was done, it would require state enabling legislation. I think either path are worth looking at, but it's certainly something I would support. If that was done, we would also have to explore compensation for nonprofits, for direct care providers, for child care providers, who right now are being squeezed by the increases in the minimum wage. But I think it's something we absolutely have to do. I think that it has to be part of any kind of workforce development plan for the state. Did we lose Jim?
We lost Jim. Well,
lost him for a
let's see. I'm gonna, Jason, why don't you go next since you left?
Sure. Okay, thanks. So the three things I think we need to do are this. There definitely has to be a living wage. Ithaca is one of the most expensive places to live in the country. The entire, the county as a whole is, and this bleeds over into Cortland County as well. And the way we get to that is really the way I think. There are some businesses that you have to treat a little differently because they have different scales of economics, one of them being farming, but I think that that can be worked out. We need to have more affordable housing. If more people can live closer to Tompkins County, they may just move here instead of commuting all the time. And while this crisis has shown us that some jobs can probably be done by telecommuting, I think a lot of the essential workers are really things that people have to do in person. And that involves childcare. Childcare not only has to be more affordable and not only pay better, but families have to be able to afford it. I know when I moved here and then we had our second child, we were paying well over $1,000 a month just for our two kids to be in childcare at the same time. And we're fortunate enough to be able to afford that. A lot of people can't.
Thank you. Thanks for stepping in, Jennifer. Sajuda.
I think there's three main things. The first is our taxes are a real problem, and they really need to get looked at seriously. What I'm in favor of is really getting rid of property taxes on first homes and on affordable housing rental units. And instead of having a property tax, have a progressive income tax. And also part of that is going to have to be fixing healthcare, because so much of our taxes are wrapped up in the ever rising costs of healthcare on counties and city governments. And so until we fix that problem too, even the progressive income tax is not going to be enough to offset that. The second thing is, I think we need to start thinking outside of the box on what affordable housing looks like. So much of this plan of just dense urban cores, but really giving most of the money to high-end real estate developers and then a few bones to affordable housing, it is kind of the model across the state and very much so in this county. But what I think we need is kind of the eco-village model, letting people live in, building affordable housing outside of the cities and really having mixed use eco-villages with affordable housing where people can also grow food and afford to live there, and there can be, considerations for
that. Anna.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I think that are really important here. When you look at the stress that is on a family and why they can't live here, why they can't afford it, I'm going to point out two things that are actually outside the context of housing that make it very difficult to live here. And that is universal childcare and universal healthcare. Those two things are taken care of. Those are two of the biggest burdens that households have. You address those, you remove those from the households. You also remove it from the county, which reduces your property tax significantly in the county by about 25% for your county tax. That's a first thing that you look at. Another thing you look at would be increasing the availability of affordable housing. How do you do that? There are specific grants at the state level, like low-income housing tax credits. You increase the funding that goes to those programs, because right now, affordable housing cannot be built without assistance. So you increase that assistance and you incentivize the development of affordable housing. So you've got that increased. And the last one is increasing income. That has been brought up before, but a livable wage is absolutely important. So in a nutshell, increase income, decrease the other factors that are burdening households, and increase access to affordable housing and the development of affordable housing. All of those are critical collectively to address this issue.
Bo.
Sure, and I think the question really started from what can we do at the state level, and these have been touched on, but I'm just going to pull them together again. I think there are three main things. First is increasing of a living wage. As we've seen in this COVID crisis, a living wage isn't a living wage for most people, and we need to fundamentally adjust and make more fair our pay scale across the state. And that can be something that can be driven from Albany. Second is the passage of the New York Health Act, as Anna has rightly pointed out. We passed that. It decreases the property burden across all our communities and allows us to expand the opportunities of things that we can do within our local communities. That's a second thing that Albany can do. And the third thing that Albany can do to help our community and find affordable opportunities here is with the expansion of universal pre-K and universal childcare. As part of the Parker School Task Force here in Cortland, we have seen that the biggest economic engine for our community is childcare. And without that, we cannot grow and provide greater economic opportunities for our community. And then they go elsewhere. They go to Syracuse, they go to Binghamton, they go to New York City. We want them here. We need to provide childcare to keep them here in our communities.
And Jordan.
I agree with much of what's been said. I'm going to talk about, yes, how property taxes are a huge burden in the state and force people to live well outside of where they would choose to. One way at the state level that could be dealt with would be to take over Medicaid payments by the state, not push that cost onto the county. You pay for this by taxing millionaires. And that would lower the property tax burden at the county level, hopefully allow people to, live in Ithaca where they choose to. And there was another thing mentioned in the question that people have to drive in to get to their job. Well, that's something we're so used to, we don't even recognize that how poor our rural public transportation networks are. I would like to see at the state level funding for increased rural public transportation, including something that's worked in other rural states with publicly paid for taxi service, so you can get the last mile folks to come in there without necessarily having to build out bus lines in every instance. And I also agree with, boosting childcare, something I worked on at the TC3 Center and here in the town of Ithaca.
And Lisa, I don't think you got this question yet, did you?
No, I did not, Jim. Thank you. I think we need to remember that the poverty level was established in the 1960s, and it was actually established at a rate that today would be about $35,000 to $40,000 for a family of four. So there's no question that the minimum wage needs to be addressed, and $15 is not even going to get us close to that. And certainly what I'm seeing in my clinics right now is a record number of people who have health insurance, but they have high deductible plans, which are being attacked across the board as insufficient, especially for mental health and addiction services. And I agree that we should not be allowing those types of plans to continue. And the assault on the Affordable Care Act by the federal government right now is horrifying when it comes to trying to provide those kinds of services. And certainly there's no question that childcare is an issue. We are paying for all of these things through grant programs that require bureaucracies to try and vet applications and push through ridiculous barriers to get that funding to the people who are providing these services. If we were able to just streamline all of these programs into direct funding to support our people, then we could provide the services and the supports that would allow folks to have a decent living wage and live in Ithaca or Cortland or Lansing or wherever they choose to live and work without having to jump through hoops to do that.
Okay, next question. Do you support immunization mandates for New York State schools? Does your public or professional record reflect this support? Will you share your position on vaccines on your website? Let's start with Anna.
Thanks, Jim. So as an epidemiologist and someone who taught public health at Cornell, this is something I had many philosophic conversations with students. I think that it's really important to start out. I will say that I am in support of immunizations, and it is how it's done and doing it smartly. Giving flexibility for families to choose their timeline to some extent, as long as that it still supports the immunization for the community as a whole. The other thing that is very important is that the immunization of the community allows for those who are immunocompromised to be protected without needing to be immunized. So you have enough of the community. It's often called herd immunity. That is important, particularly given the crisis that we're in right now and what we can see that we're dealing with. It helps us see again why this isn't so important on a community level. We have to understand the emotional strain that it puts on the individual families, have compassion for that, and make policies at the community level that both protect the entire community and protect those who are immunocompromised. So I think that that balance is extremely important to strike so that you can support the immunization that is necessary, particularly in the crisis that we're seeing right now. That is emphasized.
Oh.
So I think you had three questions. Do I support immunization mandates? The short answer is yes. Do I support vaccinations? Yes, absolutely. I'm vaccinated. My children are all vaccinated, and I absolutely support the medical advice for decades from the CDC and the US government that vaccines are the most effective way to prevent public health outbreaks. As we've seen with COVID-19, it has brought back the memories of the polio summers of the 1930s and 1940s, that we as parents are desperate for vaccinations for our children. and I would continue to support vaccination efforts through our state and local and federal governments, because vaccines work, they're safe, and they're critical for preventing large-scale public health disasters. And yes, the final question, I will be more than happy to make my position on vaccinations public on my website. I've made it more than evident on my Facebook page on multiple occasions, because I do get the question fairly regularly. And my voting record in the Portland County Legislature absolutely supports my 100% support of vaccinations.
Sajida.
I support, I mean, you know, immunizations have done great things and they're a great tool, but I absolutely do not support mandates. Many other countries, our peer countries, do not have mandates, and they function fine, because this is about more than just, you know, this comes down to bodily autonomy. It's a fundamental human right. I'm a human rights lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, and a fundamental human right and constitutional right we have is choice over our bodies. So for that reason, no, I think we should follow Britain, Sweden, Canada, and all the many other countries that don't have mandates, and just encourage it. Do it through education. I think that's how we do it. In terms of does my, you know, public record or my private record, I worked for pharmaceutical companies early in my career, involved in fraud and government contracts and procurement issues. And I would say that, you know, a big goal of mine is accountability for the pharmaceutical industry, because I think we're doing ourselves a big disservice when we stop being able to have this conversation on a vaccine by vaccine basis, or allow families to choose which ones, because not all of them are about have a herd immunity component. Many of them do, but some of them don't. So it should be a different conversation. And in any event, we need to be making policies to make the safest possible vaccines we can in New York, because we need to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable to do that for us.
Lisa.
So it's interesting. I've had this conversation with some of my support staff and others in my work environment. There are a number of them that are concerned with the honesty of the pharmaceutical companies and their goals of garnering as much financial gain as they possibly can. There are others who are concerned with herd immunity and whether or not members of their family are safe if one person has an issue medically and another is not vaccinated. I think, you know, HPV is a great example of this. A lot of mothers have decided that they don't want their kids vaccinated for HPV. My first question is, why wouldn't you? You want your daughter to get cancer and spread it? But, you know, I think what we need to think about is, as Sujata said, think about it from a vaccine to vaccine perspective. Do we want polio again? Absolutely not. Do we want measles again? Absolutely not. Is there a basic core of vaccinations that are needed to protect our environment and our community? And then additionally, think about others that might be beneficial and let individual families choose. I do think that public health, and I think Bo is right when he says that we are seeing right now how important science is in making these decisions. And that's what we need to look to when it comes to making recommendations for legislation.
Jason. Jason.
Oh, okay. You froze for a minute. Yep. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I support vaccines. I support the mandate, and I think the law on this is pretty clear since the 1905. I mean, one of the state's got a power to regulate public health, and comparing it to my body, my choice is wrong. Because, you know, the child has, it's the child's interest here we're trying to protect too. I will put this on my website without a doubt. I've always, but in picking and choosing which vaccines you get to take or not, I don't think it's right. It doesn't follow the science, and altering timelines based on, you know, I guess parental opinion that's not backed by medical science and medical practice is not the thing we want to do. We're learning this now. We have people begging for a vaccine to COVID-19, like the way people were begging for vaccines for polio and for smallpox and other things that ravaged, you know, other diseases that ravage communities. We don't need to take a step backward and put people who are immunocompromised at risk. And I have people on my staff in the town hall who are immunocompromised, and I would never put them at risk.
Jordan.
You know, this has been a huge issue in the Assembly office, and it has helped me do extensive research on vaccinations. And I'll start by saying that I'm very sympathetic to those who are immunocompromised and those children who are medically fragile and are unable to receive vaccinations. There have been cases, supposedly, where with the recent mandate for school children, which again, remember, was a religious exemption blocked, that at the same time, there have been medical exemptions that have been failed to be kept up for children who may be at risk or may be disabled and they can't take these vaccines. So, you know, the way the law has been working is one thing, and the impacts on the most medically different. The law was passed to deal with a public health crisis, you know, measles vaccines across the state in very many places. I do support, you know, passing these laws to prevent innocent children from being harmed and damaged by diseases. You know, it's not our choice to inflict a disease on someone else. And if it's preventable, I believe we should take that stance. This is all the more clear now when we're seeing coronavirus and the impact that has on our society. I believe, you know, many people today would be interested in a vaccine for coronavirus, and let's hope that also comes soon.
And Sep.
So yes, I support vaccines and I support the mandates. The legislature took the step of removing the religious exemption last year. That's something I would have voted for if I was in the assembly. If there are going to be exemptions, I believe they should only be granted in cases where there's a real health threat to the individual, for immunocompromised children, for instance. And I'm happy to put that information on my website. And as a few others have said, I think, you know, this current pandemic has really showed us the importance of vaccinations and the importance of science, as we're all praying that the scientists develop a vaccine so we can end this terrible situation that we're in and reopen the economy and get back to work. I absolutely support vaccines. They've saved countless millions of lives historically. And yes, and I'm happy to put it on my website, as I said.
Very good. Now we're approaching 9 o'clock, but I'm going to ask you, and I'm assuming that you all would like to go forward. There's certainly lots more questions. Does everybody just raise your hand? Are you all in favor of taking some more questions? All right. So we're going to go ahead for a while, and everybody else who's in the comfort of home can nod out on their couch or, you know, watch it later on YouTube. So let me see if I have my next question here. Oh, I don't have my next question yet. Let's see. Oh, here it comes. All right. Do you support the New York Health Act? And what would you do to urge your colleagues in the New York State Senate to ensure the passage of the New York Health Act? Should private insurance companies continue to play a role in delivering health insurance? So there's 3 important questions, and you have an entire minute to answer them. And we'll start this round with Sep.
So yes, I certainly support the New York Health Act. I think it's definitely needed for our state. I will say that it is a challenging thing to pass, right? And the states that have tried to do this, the ones that spring to mind are Vermont, Colorado, California. No state has managed to pull this off yet. And part of the reason why is that, you know, the bill works its way through the legislature, and at a certain point, you have a cost estimate. And when you have to take, you know, the whole cost of shifting the private employer healthcare system, which is astronomically expensive, onto the public expense, there's this sticker shock. And, you know, the editorial boards go crazy and the business community goes crazy, and then it gets scuttled. And I think the task is really to work past that point, to understand that this is a political challenge, and that to educate people, you know, and also to organize at the grassroots to say that there is a long-term savings to this, right? And there is a real benefit because people will be covered universally with healthcare. And there's also a benefit to the economy because you're no longer going to be shackled to a job that you hate just for the benefits. And you'll be able to leave your job if you want to start a business. There's a real economic boost to passing the New York Health Act. So yes, it's absolutely something I support.
Okay, Sujata.
Yes, I absolutely support the New York Health Act. And I agree with Seth that it is challenging to pass. I think that in addition to the cost, the other challenge is the backlash against choice. And this is very much part of the same conversation to me and why I care so much about these. These things have an effect outside of just one context. So a lot of people are scared that if New York controls health insurance, all their choices over their bodies are going to be controlled. Their choice about death, their choice about vaccines, their choice about birth. And I think part of what we need to do to make sure this, to be able to pass this and do this kind of historic thing, because we know the federal government's not going to do this anymore, given the candidates we have. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we are very clear that New York does not attach strings to public benefits. And so we will not be taking choices away from people if they have the New York Health Act. They will choose their doctors. They will make their own medical choices with their doctors. And we're not going to do that for them at a state bureaucratic level. I think I answered most of the question, but yeah, it has my full support. And it's a big priority for me.
Jordan and Jennifer, take over for me for a couple minutes, okay?
All right, not sure what it means if Jim leaves when I'm coming on, but absolutely, I support the New York Health Act. This is something, the Assembly's passed multiple times. It's actually been introduced since 1992. So there's been a vision in the Assembly, and as you know, the Senate I assume the Senate just flipped to Democratic in 2018. I think we are closer to passing this than most people may realize. One of the questions was, should the private insurance companies have any role in health insurance going forward? I think, this is one of the sticking points, that one of the major growth sectors and jobs is in the healthcare sector. I think it's fine to keep them in as long as they're not eating up billions and billions of Medicaid medical expenditures as the middleman that, we know we have the most expensive healthcare in the world. And so much of that gets absorbed in the insurance industry for, frankly, poor outcomes in many other states or many other countries. I sincerely hope with the onslaught of the coronavirus crisis that people will be thinking about this differently. We're now our health outcomes, I hope we realize, are tied to those of everyone in our society. And New York Health Act would change that, and I would fully support that.
Thank you. Bo, you're up next.
Okay, great. Yes, I absolutely support the passage of the New York Health Act, as I mentioned earlier. How I would encourage others to support it, and I've been involved in this in trying to build an understanding here in Cortland, in the district, on the New York Health Act. There's a couple of things to do. First of all is to tell the stories. To tell the stories of the people who aren't sufficiently covered by the private insurers that have put the noose around our communities' necks. They do not provide the choice that we think they provide. They don't give us the choices. They give us an illusion of choice. The choice doesn't exist for many of our people, so we have to tell those stories. Second of all, for the fiscally conservative group, I always like to look at the numbers. What are the tax implications? What's the total cost? What we find when we look at these numbers is that the total cost for healthcare for all of our communities and all of our individuals goes down with the passage of the New York Health Act. And the last thing I would say on this is going to be a critical opportunity to expand the personal freedom of all of our citizens, because they will not have to work, as Seth has pointed out, in jobs that they don't want to be in order to maintain poor healthcare. They will be covered throughout the state, wherever they want to go and whatever they want to pursue.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. Lisa, you're next.
Yeah, I live this every freaking day. We have the 11th largest economy in the world, and we can't cover our people with healthcare. It's disgusting. And let me tell you something else. We have a number of people who are coming to our clinics every single day and have to pay high deductible plans and can't afford to be seen. We have the right to better healthcare. And not only that, I could give, as an employer, a $20,000 salary increase to every one of my employees if I didn't have to pay for healthcare right now. I've seen a 60% increase in my healthcare costs over the past 8 years, and it's all going to the insurance companies and their profits. As I've said before, and you've all heard me say it, the words funds flow and healthcare should never be said in the same sentence. And that's all I talk about every day. So absolutely, I support the New York Healthcare Act. And absolutely, we need to have this conversation because we're already paying for it. But what we're paying for is bad outcomes and medicine, not health.
Thank you. Anna, you're up next.
Here, here. All right, I second that. Absolutely, I have a full supporter of the New York Health Act. I think that it is absolutely critical, and I'm so sick of hearing how are we going to pay for this, because we have just proven with a $2 trillion federal tax incentive stimulus bill that it is a matter of will. I think the things that we need to remember, we need to keep in mind, the RAND study that came out, the Friedman study that came out shows that it actually would be a cost savings. That is hugely important. Those studies were estimates over the next 10 years. This would decrease property tax. That is hugely important. Also, this is a progressive tax. So the cost of this would increase as your income increases. The only group that would actually see an increase in their healthcare costs would be the rich. For the lowest income groups, they wouldn't be paying anything as they currently do. Those things are hugely important. Private insurance would only step in the areas where the New York Health Act would not cover, and those would be things like cosmetic surgery. This is a progressive tax. I want to point out one last thing. In this COVID crisis, people think that the treatments have been covered. They have not. For people who do not have insurance and have gotten this has gotten COVID-19, they have had to pay all of the bills as a result, including all of the hospital bills. That should never have happened. That is a perfect example of why we have a totally broken healthcare system. This is the only way to fix it. We actually have the funding. We have the people here who can pay for it. We need to do these billionaire taxes and ultra-millionaire taxes. We've protected them for too long. Now is the time.
Jim, I just want to say one thing real quickly. People are making decisions about furloughing individual workers based on whether or not they have health care. That's wrong.
Who else is left, Jennifer?
Just Jason is the last one.
So yeah, I absolutely support the New York Health Act because besides expanding choice, it's also going to cover things like mental health, dental, eye care, things that a lot of healthcare plans actually don't cover right now. It's going to take the cost off of local governments, not just county government. It's going to enable us to lower our property taxes. So if you're talking about reforming the property tax system, you better be supporting the New York Health Act. It's going to take small businesses out of the business of healthcare. So like a bunch of us have already said, it's going to actually just put healthcare back where it should be with the doctors. And I think that the real roadblock here is the governor. It's not actually the Senate anymore. The Senate, if you have to have somebody in Albany who's willing to stick up, get in Cuomo's face almost and say, look, you talk about reform all the time. Well, here's the way you can actually do something to reform everybody's lives for the better. And I'm used to fighting 800-pound gorillas ever since I got involved in the fracking battle in Dryden. I'm definitely willing to get up in the governor's face and fight him on this one. Because if we can't do it from Tompkins and Cortland County, nobody can do it.
Okay, next question. Given the financial stresses caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, there are numerous competing needs within the state of New York. In the 2021 budget, New York State reserves the right to withhold some state aid currently allocated for school districts. How will you help school districts manage these potential funding shortfalls? Will funding for public schools be one of your priorities? Let's start with Sujata.
Yes, my mom's a teacher. My dad was a teacher. And, you know, education is everything, and we have to make it a priority. We have to make our teachers a priority. And it's really, you know, it shouldn't even be a question. So that's not where the budget cuts need to come from. The budget cuts need to come from the $636 million we spend to float Alcoa so that it can provide us with 400 jobs. Or, you know, the $1 billion that we are spending on corporate welfare in a variety of other, you know, known to be corrupt projects. So I think that there is money there that we need to tap first before we tap into teachers' salaries and start going after our children, because our children deserve an education, and public schools are vital. They're essential.
Next, we'll go to Sep.
Yes, that would absolutely be a priority of mine. You know, protecting our public schools and making sure that they're getting their adequate funding. You know, and I think we really have to talk about changing the tax structure in the state to generate more revenue, because these are going to be very, very tough years. And the state is going to come to a reckoning point where we are going to be facing either potential cuts or increasing taxes on the wealthy, looking at other revenue generators like the stock transfer tax. I know the pied de terre tax was in the Assembly One House's budget. There are progressive taxes out there that can generate quite a bit of revenue. The stock transfer tax on its own, we're talking billions of dollars. This is a tax that has been on the books since the early part of the 20th century. It's a tax on stock sales. And since the 1970s, it's been rebated 100% back to the brokerage firms. I think that's one area we have to look at. I think there's a potential to generate more revenue in a progressive way so that we can make critical investments in our public education.
Jordan.
Yes, you know, I understand this battle very well. My brother is the high school teacher here in town. My mom was an educator, and, you know, I take this fight very seriously. You know, not only is it wrong to cut funding from our schools, even during this downturn, it is actually violates an important court order from 2007, which, you know, the highest court in New York State went back to the Pataki administration at the time and said we're underfunding our schools by $8 billion to meet a constitutional provision for a sound basic education that every New Yorker is guaranteed. You know, 2007 is a long time ago, but over the years, we now are still underfunding our schools by $3.5 billion today. You know, after several Democratic governors, we still haven't gotten there. So I agree as well. You know, when we now have not enough taxes coming in for millionaires, this was a planned, orchestrated slashing of taxes starting in the 1980s to reduce the high income, the rate on highest income earners down from, at the time, it was over 80%. Now it's around 6.5%. And this is actually lower than lower income people in our state pay. It's time to change this. It's our decision, and we have the choice to fund what we care about.
Lisa.
Thanks, Jim. You know what? I'm just tired of the shell game. The 2% tax cap is a joke. We are just changing the individuals that we pay the money to. We don't pay it to the state because the governor has decided that we have a 2% tax cap, which is a game. And then we're going to pay it to the county for Medicaid. And then we're going to not pay it to the state for something else, but we're going to pay it to the school districts. The children of this state should not have to bear the burden of the millionaires who are not paying their fair share. And I absolutely agree with Seth and Sujata and Jordan. The stock transfer tax alone could generate billions of dollars. The pied de terre tax. The Fiscal Policy Institute has an entire brochure on what we can do to pay for the school districts to allow them to continue to survive and thrive. We are playing a shell game, and we must stop. I might have lunch with Andy every day, but I don't agree with everything that he says and does. And there's a lot that we can do in Albany to make sure that our children are protected, that they're covered, and that our teachers have the assets that they need to provide the education that they deserve. As a former teacher and the president of the Cortland City School Board for 5 years, I absolutely get that. We should not be angry at teachers for getting the benefits that they deserve. We should all get those benefits, from pharmaceuticals to health insurance to retirement. And we don't, because of this false 2% tax cap. And that needs to change.
Jason.
Thanks, Jim. I think everyone's finding out right now that, teachers and aides and everything, they are essential. I mean, we're all, like I said earlier tonight, we're all homeschooling now. So we know they're important. We know that funding schools properly is important. We also need to make sure that every single student has access to the internet, because whether or not they go, or when they go back to school, they're still going to have assignments they have to do from home. And the funding has to be there for that. But this stock transfer tax can't be renewed anymore. I mean, this thing has to be it just has to be allowed to expire, because it will raise the revenue that will help actually fund the court case that Jordan mentioned earlier. And again, this goes towards the whole idea that a couple of us have talked about of getting away from property taxes, because property taxes inherently create inequality in school systems, because the bottom line is Westchester can afford to do more for their kids than the Cortland City School District or the Groton School District. And I have in Dryden we have 5 school districts, and they're all their services are all different, and it's because we all have different property tax bases, and we also have these crazy funding formulas that if you've ever sat through a state school budget talk, your mind will be blown. So,
Anna.
Yeah, I have been and will always be in strong support of early education and K through 12. They are our future. We cripple our education system and we cripple our future generations. It's not rocket science. That's absolutely critical. I think that one of the things that's really important for us to understand is that in the budget that just came out, it wasn't that education funding was kept equal. It was actually cut significantly, and federal stimulus money was used to fill that back in. What are we going to do about that next year? And secondly, how many of us actually know about that? Where was the transparency? Transparency needs to happen. There could be opportunities. If this is put forward as a possibility for cuts, we all need to galvanize, campaign against it. We need to be educated about what's going on, do that together. The legislature could come back into session and do supplemental funding to counter that. Those are things that could happen this year. Another thing that needs to happen, if it is cut next year, one of the focuses that needs to happen in 2010, foundation aid was cut. That is the funding specifically in the budget that supports the equalization so that the disadvantaged communities have the same access to programming and infrastructure and education. $4 billion was cut from that program. So when we come back next year, that needs to be made whole. The foundation aid needs to be increased and total education needs to be increased so everybody has equal access to education. That is critical. The taxes that everybody has talked about, the opportunities are there and can be used to do this. It just needs to be prioritized.
And I think this question still comes to you, right, Bo?
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I absolutely would fight against cuts to state aid for school districts. And we've seen this here in Cortland, and I've worked on the mayor's task force to decide what we're going to do with a Parker school. For those of you who don't know and aren't tied into the Cortland community, we actually had to close 2 schools last year in our school district to try to make up for the lack of sufficient funding from the state. We've already done everything we can do in our community to cut and find new ways of restructuring and new ways of thinking. The state cannot continue to attack our most vulnerable citizens who are our students. I support a birth through college education program. We need to expand universal pre-K, and we need to adequately fund our education program all the way through college. I spoke at the UUP rally here in SUNY Cortland to really push and put a highlight on the lack of funding at our college level. We can't let the state attack our K through 12 education as well. It is too fundamental to the well-being of all of our citizens. We have to continue to fight to provide that funding.
Okay, next question. What do you think about the 2019 bail reform laws and the recent changes? We'll start with Jason.
Well, the changes, I understand why they came about, but fundamentally the changes were needed in 2019, like the DA candidates talked about. The whole point of bail is to just ensure that somebody is going to return to court. It's not a pre-punishment. At the point when someone's arrested and they come for an arraignment, they haven't been convicted of a single thing yet. So the least restrictive means should always be used to make sure someone comes back. And what we found, and what I found in my law practice, is that there are judges who just simply would look at somebody and say, you know what, I think that they should put bail on them. And those abuses are what led to the reforms. But I think that these new changes were a little bit reactionary. We like DA Van Houten said that we didn't see the problems that other places did see. But fundamentally, I think the one good thing that came out of these reforms is that domestic violence offenses can actually be addressed better than they could from the initial 2019 reforms, because one thing that me and my colleagues have found is that those are the kind of cases where if somebody is released, they might actually go, and do something. So the judges should have had a little bit more discretion to figure out a way to make sure that there wouldn't be a reoffense before the case actually went to trial.
Lisa.
So there's no question that the early bail reform legislation actually was needed. We were seeing a lot of people who were being incarcerated and could not make bail, and as a result couldn't access mental health or addiction services, and it was based solely on whether or not they had access to funds to allow them to make bail. And we had judges who were making decisions about, in their own minds, whether or not someone should be out on the streets. The changes that were made, I think, needed to be made. I firmly believe that the former system was set up to continue to incarcerate the poor, the indigent, the drug addicted, the alcoholics, and those with mental health issues. And anything that we can do to help support those people, rather than supporting those individuals who can make bail because they do have access to funding, is something that we should be doing. So, I think that these changes were important and necessary. I think we need to continue to look at this because, jail is not a place where an addicted person should be looking at, coming clean.
Jordan.
Yeah, the idea that we had anything approaching a legitimate justice system before these reforms was a joke. Look no further than the Khalif Browder case, who was locked up in Rikers prison under suspicion of stealing a backpack for several years, simply because he couldn't afford to pay bail. This is a completely disproportionate impact on the poor, almost setting up possibly kind of a debtor's type prison, right? You can't pay, you can't be free. And we know who that impacts most greatly. It impacts people of color, poor communities. It's highly disproportionate. So I absolutely supported the changes from last year. And I think what just happened in the budget was frankly the result of overreaction, was a result of right wing and media, sensationalism of the recent changes. Many of the effects involving bail actually, were implemented last November, not when the law actually took effect in January. This is because judges didn't want to release a lot of people who were held on bail all at one time in January. So, the whole idea that we're looking at crime rates from January, and this is totally linked to the recent bail law, is absolutely wrong. So I support the changes, or I support the initial bill.
Sep?
Yeah, as everybody else has said, I think these reforms were sorely needed. Lots of people ending up in jail pre-trial. And obviously jail is an incredibly disruptive and traumatic experience in a person's life. Leads people to lose custody of kids, lose jobs. You know, it also compels people to plead guilty just so that they can get out of jail. And I think the bail reform was needed to give these people some justice. And Jordan brought up the case of Kalief Browder. I think the counterexample of that is Harvey Weinstein, who was accused of sexually assaulting 2 women and then was able to pay his way and walk free. And I think it makes no sense to have cash bail. I think it enshrines a principle that there is one law for the rich and one law for the poor. And I actually think the legislature went in the wrong direction. I think we need to be moving in the direction of eliminating cash bail entirely. And I think that we do need to give judges some discretion for the cases that Jason meant, like domestic violence, where there's a clear threat to public safety. Judges some discretion to hold people who pose a risk to public safety.
Excuse me. Sujata, I'm getting messages that I've been mispronouncing your name all night, for which I apologize. How do you correctly pronounce your first name?
Sujata.
Thank you. And next question. Your turn on this question.
All right. Yeah, this is an important question to me. I sit on the assigned counsel panel and represent indigent defendants. And I also represent paying clients. And I've seen some pretty unjust situations unfold over the years. So I do think we needed bail reform. I do think, echo the sentiments of everybody else that a cash bail system, the way we've had it, is just wrong. And your ability to be in jail or out of jail should not depend on whether you have access to funds. And in terms of the new changes, I could see the controversy. I mean, the problem that so many people fought in New York to keep a kind of a dangerousness calculus out, because it often leads to racial profiling and injustice. It's like another way. But at the same time, I represent a lot of survivors of domestic violence, and there is a very real danger. There is no time when somebody is more dangerous than when they've just been reported. And so, especially, in those cases, we do need to give judges discretion to put somebody in jail, because it really could mean life or death for that survivor or victim of domestic violence and their children.
Thank you. Bo.
Yeah, I do support the 2019 bail reform laws. In the Cortland County Legislature, we have been long investigating our jail population and what is going on with our jail population. And one of the things we found is that 75% of the people that were in jail over the last 8 years were there pre-conviction. 75% of our huge increase in our jail population were people who were never convicted of a crime. They weren't convicted of anything. They were simply sitting in jail. Their families were falling apart. They were losing their jobs. They were losing their housing. They weren't getting the health care that they needed, because we don't have sufficient facilities in our jail. And I absolutely supported the bail reform measures from 2019. And we started to see impacts on that. The knee-jerk reaction of the latest legislature to turn back some of those reforms is unfortunate. Having a specific exemption for a judge to make a decision on domestic violence only is one thing I could support, but I would never, ever support expanding the power of judges to a power they've never had before, unilaterally giving discretion, because we know across other rural upstate counties, they're not going to be as progressive in their views. They're not going to be as forward thinking, and we will see a return through judge discretion of racial disparities and racial profiling. And so we have to be very careful in the area of domestic violence only that we might give judges some discretion, but it has to be very carefully crafted. And I think the previous legislature that just voted on these went too far in their reforms.
Anna.
I as well was very glad to see the bail reform that happened last year. You can see the results of that by the decreased number of people who are incarcerated. in jails in particular, in prisons as well. That's an indication of a change that needed to happen. One of the things as a county legislator, though, we've seen is, and this is getting a bit into the nuances, is that there was not a funding associated with those bail reforms. So I would even take it a step further and say, do those bail reforms, but then invest money from the state into implementing those bail reforms. And what ultimately ended up happening is it ended up becoming an unfunded mandate and going on to property tax, which of course we know discriminates more for low-income people. So that's one of the issues that I would like to see them go even further. Another thing that I wanted to point out for the rollback, some concerns for me, although I definitely agree with Jason with respect to domestic violence and addressing that issue. I'm very concerned with some of the rollbacks. In particular, let me give you two examples. One example is that you can now, or the judges can now retain someone pre-trial if they have a misdemeanor, for example, harm to property, a very vague term. What does that mean? Or if they have repeat felonies, but what if those felonies were 2 decades ago? And what are we doing with respect to someone's ability for rehabilitation? And that is completely defeatist and goes against everything that we're trying to do. So I have major concerns with the rollbacks that were just done. Okay, we have 2 more questions. And these are going to be short questions. My question compilers tell me. And so let's see if you can do them with a yes or no. And that first question is, do you support legalizing marijuana? And we'll start where we left off with Anna. So you're asking me if I am in support of legalization of marijuana? Correct. And yes or no? Absolutely, I am in support of that. I think that alone for how many people, and in particular Black and brown communities and people who are incarcerated because this has not been legalized, that is a huge issue. If you look at all the drugs that are legal, you look at coffee, you look at, alcohol, it is a strange discrimination against this particular for adults. So that is one thing that I'd really philosophically ask people. But the one concern that I have, the way that the bill is written, is again, it would be an unfunded mandate, because facilities that would be that would have the marijuana, because federally it would still be illegal, they would have cash and they would have marijuana, but there is no funding put in administration, and there's no funding put in law enforcement in this particular case. So again, this would be an unfunded mandate, and the sales tax would all go to the state at this point, by the way it's written. So it would not help municipalities, and they would have an extra cost of putting it in place. So as it's written, those things need to be addressed for, I think, it to be useful for the entire state, to legalize it so that it can be part of our system. Oh. I support the legalization of adult use cannabis. I believe it is a critical issue for addressing disparities in our marginalized communities. But I also believe it's a fundamental issue and right for our farmers to find new economic opportunities. And along with that, we need to make absolutely sure that when this is legalized, that we have a strong licensing in place that protects our New York farmers. We do not want to see large international agribusiness coming in and taking up all of our licensing opportunities and taking all the profits and all the economic development that this is going to generate, and take that away from our New York families. We need to be really strong on that and support our New York farmers. And we also need to make sure that a large portion of that sales tax money come back to our communities to counteract the continuing unfunded mandates the state places on our county taxpayers. So we have to continue to make sure that we craft this legislation right, but I absolutely fundamentally believe that the legalization of adult use cannabis is critical for New York going forward. So Jada.
Yes. I believe you just wanted a yes or no, so yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Legalization of marijuana.
Answering it that way. Very good. Seth.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes, I do. And I would like to see the tax money in the legislation earmarked for an important purpose like education to bring it back to our communities automatically.
Lisa?
As an addiction provider, yes. Research. We need to know the impact of marijuana on the youth of our communities. We have done no research. We don't know what this is doing to the minds of our young people who will now have additional access to this type of drug. Yes, it can also be used, and we should be doing research on this based on whether or not it can be used as a pain medication. We've done no research. We have no idea what this could do to our communities. And yes, if a majority of those funds are going to go back to treat addictions. Thank you.
Jason?
Yes, and I think the benefits need to go to small farmers, to communities that have been harmed by the drug war and mass incarceration. I don't want the legislation to favor big companies like Canopy out of Canada. And the money needs to go into localities, or at the very least, I mean, I was at a meeting back in February, and one of the people there is right now just grows hemp out in Seneca County, and it was pretty funny. He's like, just put it towards roads, just put the money towards roads. It'll help everything out. So yeah, it's a revenue, and especially when you're talking about possibly $12 billion budget deficit in the state. I mean, come on, like, look at Colorado, Washington. People are already driving over to Massachusetts. Legalize it already.
Okay, last question, and it is one near and dear to my heart. Will you support the Democratic candidate who wins the June 23rd primary, yes or no? And I'm going to rephrase that, actually. Will you support the nominee of the Democratic Party for president? And also, I want to remind everybody from earlier that you should request your ballots by email or by mail. And you can go on to our website and our Facebook pages, or to the Tompkins County Board of Elections website, and figure out the exact means of doing that. But you can use the fact that we're in a pandemic as a reason to request an absentee ballot, no other questions asked. So will you support the nominee? Oh, support, I'm being told I missed, see, that's because I think about national politics too much. I'm sorry. Will you support the winner of this primary, yes or no? Will you support the winner of the Democratic primary for assembly? Will you support whoever wins that candidate this November and not run as an independent? Sorry. And I'll start that question with Bo.
And the answer is yes, I would be more than happy to support whoever wins the nomination for this assembly seat. We have a great suite of candidates here, and I will always support our Democratic candidates, and I would never run against, as an independent, any of our nominated candidates. I am a Democrat through and through. I work for the Cortland County Democratic Committee. I help bring forward Democrats across our county and across our region, and I will absolutely support whoever our candidate is going forward. I, of course, expect it's going to be me, but I'll support whoever wins.
Great. Anna?
Absolutely, of course. I am on two party lines right now, the Working Families Party and the Democratic Party, but I would support whoever wins the Democratic Party this primary moving forward. So I wanted to make that very clear.
Jason?
Yes.
Lisa?
Absolutely. I keep saying that this group of candidates is really great for the voters because you can't go wrong, and I will absolutely support whoever wins the nomination.
Jordan?
Yes, of course, I will support the nominee. We need to keep the legacy alive of strong Democratic and progressive representation for the district.
Sep?
Yes, absolutely. I'll support the nominee.
And Sujata?
Yes, I will.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating. You're going to have a chance to do your 1 minute closing statements. And we'll start as we began with Sep.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everyone tonight. COVID-19 represents a grave and pressing threat for our state. And the years ahead are going to be very difficult. And I think it's important that we have strong leadership in Albany. I've spent 8 years on the Common Council, chairing one of 2 standing committees. I'm also the City of Ithaca's alternate acting mayor. And I've also spent the last 5 years as an employee in Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton's office. And in that role, I've worked with community leaders all across the Assembly District, from Trumansburg to the City of Cortland. I am ready to do this job. I have the right qualifications and training, and it would give me the greatest honor to be your next representative in the New York State Assembly. Thank you very much.
Sujata.
Arundhati Roy says that the COVID pandemic is a portal, and we get to emerge from this in a totally new place, and it might be a great place. We do have this opportunity to radically change politics right now, to radically change. We have an environment that's clean for the first time in a long time. We have people, who have been working slavishly, realizing maybe it's not fair that I've got to work around the clock and still live paycheck to before the next paycheck, just by trying to pay the basic bills. We've got people waking up and seeing the grave injustices that exist, the grave inequalities in our system, and how wrong it is that we don't have health care, with a disproportionate effect that brown and black people have been facing in this pandemic, the racism of our system, and the injustice. And so this is the moment where we need somebody to go in who is willing to seize on that radical capital of all of this momentum and really make change happen. FDR didn't just make the New Deal because he was a good guy. He did it because people were out in the streets making noise, and people were coming in, putting enormous pressure on him. This is what I work with. This is what I've been training for all my life, all my career. And I'm ready to be your voice. You're going to come out in the streets with me, and I'm going to be in there holding Albany accountable and demanding a seismic change to how we do things. That's what you get with me.
Thank you. Bo.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all and to kind of introduce myself more to the Tompkins Democratic Committee. I hope through this discussion that you've seen that I really do follow the idea of being proven, principled, and progressive. As minority leader in Cortland County Legislature, I've worked very hard to bring forward progressive and just policies. My votes reflect that. And I think there's a lot that we can do. I work very hard to make sure that we're focusing on the right issues. I understand budgets. I understand the impacts of county government and how that is impacted by state. But I also look regionally, beyond just the small community of Cortland, across Tompkins, across the state, across the Appalachian region, pulling together a coalition of best practices, connections, ideas and suggestions that'll help move all of New York State forward. And I look forward to being your assembly person in New York State Assembly next year. Thank you.
Anna. Still muted, Anna.
Oh, thank you. I grew up in Trumansburg, and that was my playground. The forest was my playground. That taught me a love of the environment. And as I grew older, I saw that the environment needed support and needed someone to stand up for it. And I saw what happened when that didn't happen. The bulldozing of rainforests, that happens, or the possibility of an incinerator on the shores of our lakes. The environment needs people to fight for it. That's the same with our children, who deserve access to affordable care, childcare, and education, or our vulnerable populations that deserve access to safe housing as an absolute, or for all of us who deserve access to affordable healthcare, particularly in the environment that we're in right now and the crisis that we're in right now. I have worked my entire life to fight for these issues. I'm ready to fight for you. I'm ready to fight for your children. I'm ready to fight for all of us. And I'm asking for your support and your vote to be the next state assembly member. Thank you.
Jason. You're muted, Jason.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks for the opportunity to answer your questions and introduce myself to you. And I'm here tonight to ask you for your vote for state assembly. If elected, I'm going to make sure that our state government works with you and your communities to improve the lives of everybody. I've been a staunch advocate for small business and local farmers against big business interests. I'll demand funding for rural schools and hospitals and support or volunteer fire and ambulance companies. I've been an attorney who's been helping clients who have been damaged by addiction, and I want to keep doing that from Albany as well. The one thing that New York can do is protect us all from the regressive policies coming out of Washington right now, and I think that we need to have strong progressive voices in Albany to do that, such as myself. I will support the New York Health Act more than ever because the COVID-19 crisis shows us that health care is a right, not a privilege, and people need to be taken care of. And I do want to continue supporting living wage, the people who go to work, all of our essential workers, the people who we're calling heroes now can actually take care of their families without having to get support from the county and the state. And lastly, all of this means reforming how we do things in Albany, reforming our property tax system, reforming the old adage of the 3 men in a room making decisions for everybody. I want to be there. I want to be your champion in Albany to break that old way of doing things so that we can get things done for everybody. Thank you.
And Lisa?
Look, what we need is passion. The past informs the future, but the past is where we've been. We need people who can move us forward in a new environment. I'm ready to support both our counties, our entire district, not just Tompkins County, not just Cortland County, not just the rural communities, not just the urban communities, but throughout our district to lead by example. I lead every day. My employees know where we are and know where we're going, and also know that we don't know what the future holds for us. So while the past informs where we go, we need passion to get us to tomorrow. We are in the midst of the most devastating crisis that many of us, even my children, have ever experienced. I have a 27-year-old and a 22-year-old, and I'm having to guide them through this environment that we don't know where it will lead us. What we need is passion, thoughtful, intelligent leadership. And that's what I bring to this race. And that's why I'm running for assembly, because I believe leadership, thoughtful counsel, and science-based, information-based leadership is what will get us where we need to be.
And Jordan.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Glad to participate in this. It's unquestionably the case that none of us thought we'd be facing this pandemic when all of our campaigns began a few months ago. We are clearly entering and are already in a very tumultuous time. That includes COVID-19, that includes the onslaught of climate change, which is gonna, only be ever increasing. What we don't need in this time of uncertainty is more uncertainty with someone coming to Albany who doesn't know how it works. I've been there for 10 years working in Albany. I have the relationships there. I know how to get things done for you the way I've been doing all this time. And I also understand the needs of Ithaca and Tompkins and Cortland from all of this work. I have a strong track record fighting for progressive values for you. That's something I would like to and hope to continue to do in Albany. I think I'm the best person to hit the ground running and automatically, immediately be able to enter the system and know what I'm doing. That includes increasing funding for education, making sure childcare is expanded across our region. There is the new TC3 model of childcare at the community college. This is something I'd like to see implemented at every college across the region and across the state. These are just some of the things I want to continue to do for you and your family in Albany. And please check out my website, which is www.jordanlesserforassembly.com, and we can keep the conversation going there. Thank you.
So thanks to all of our candidates for participating. We've arranged breakout rooms for all of you to talk to the media, and if the media is still awake, which they better be because they're supposed to work late at night, right? Anyway, thanks so much for participating, and thanks for sticking in there for, with 7 of you answering these questions. It's approaching 10 o'clock, but it's a great job, and I think it's been very informative. I really want to thank the team of people that helped put this on. Ted Crane, who's the tech guy behind the scenes there, making all this run smoothly. Jennifer, who's been right here on the screen, keeping us all honest, and has also helped with the tech support backup and with the assembling the questions, and with Katie Nicholson, our first vice chair, and Liz Hartman, who've been assembling the questions and feeding them to me throughout the evening. So thanks to everybody. And as I said earlier, if there's interest in doing another forum like this, then please let us know. And now that we've done it, I think we can arrange another one. So everybody stay safe, be well, and remember to get your absentee ballot. Thanks and good night.